Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, look on his works, ye mighty, and despair, for he is Matt. How's it going today, Matt?
Oh, thanks for complimenting my haircut. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I was going for, you know.
Cool. This week on the show, our series examining Stephen King's 11/22/63 continues with part 8. We're chatting about chapters 19 through 22 of the book as Jake's preparation for Kill Oswald Day ramps up. He finds himself reuniting with Sadie and living a double life. Or I guess if we're counting the life he was living back in 2011, like a triple he's living a lot of lives, Matt.
Yeah, he's living in a very unhealthy and unsustainable way. We can say that
this
much.
Can only end well, or in this case, well means his girlfriend's face gets brutally sliced open by her insane ex-husband. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Intense stuff here. I mean, I don't know where we are page count wise, but this feels like we're really ramping things up toward some kind of breaking point, some kind of flashpoint. Yeah,
we finished this week on page 577 out of roughly 800. So we're in close. I think we still have 3 weeks left of this book after this one, but you're definitely getting there.
Yeah, I guess what I mean is, you know, given we've read so many King novels, I feel like I know how he likes to pace things out, and
sure.
I would just anticipate that we have the next 2 weeks are solid wild stuff happening, and then maybe the week after that is denouement would be my considered estimate, right?
Fair. Yeah.
We'll
yeah,
see.
I agree with you though. This is some really, really intense stuff. You know, I want to talk to you about the Sadie thing because like there's a part of me while I was thinking this and you know, I think it's just like being a person of the internet for so many years is sometimes you read things and just like thoughts pop up in your head. They're not your thoughts. They're not your opinions, but there's like the opinion of someone out there that you know that would possibly annoy you. But it's just in your head and it won't go away. And I had this thought while reading this section, and the thought was, if Sadie and Jake were just going to break up and then get back together again before all this stuff went down, why do we do all this in the first place? And again, it's not my thought, and it's not, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just like it got into my head, and I was like, oh yeah, I could definitely see someone constructing an argument around how King kind of just through his pantsing, just like kind of treads water sometimes, and that's something like this. So I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
That's really interesting because it just so happens this week I've been thinking a lot more about story structure and specifically just like, you know, what are the beats of some of the traditional story structures like heist or you know, romance. And so not that I'm saying this is, you know, what King did, but like this is a romance story. This is a romance story more so than most of the books we've read. Falling in love with this woman, you know, getting to know her, having there be some source of tension. Like these are all staples of a romance plot, and very often, not universally, of course, but very often in a romance plot, there's some kind of escalation of the romantic misunderstandings until it looks like the couple is going to break up, and this is the all is lost moment of a romance story, right? But then they realize, you know, they depends on whether it's like a tragedy or not a tragedy, but in the end, they're able to mend the misunderstanding, right? So all that being said, I don't know that this is a pantser thing necessarily, but it could just be that he's self-consciously writing a romance story and was like, they've, you know, in order for this to be a story that's actually interesting and has some drama to it, some conflict to it, there's got to be a little bit of tumult and turmoil.
Yeah, I like that. You know, again, I just want to reiterate, like, this was not my complaint about this week's section. Yeah. I'm warped and forever damaged by being forever online. But I agree with you. Like the ups and downs, the backs and forths, the break up and get back togetherness of romance is kind of a core device in romance stories. And I agree with you. Like, this is, and I'm glad you said that. This is first and foremost a romance novel. It is King, like we talked about Duma Key, and we've talked so many times about throughout the course of this thing, that King is doing a very specific thing. He's picking up this book and he says, I am going to write a gothic novel. He's picking up this book and wanting to do something else. And here, I think you're right that he takes this idea, this cool idea he had that many years ago, that he wanted to write about traveling through time to stop the Kennedy assassination. And he's like, okay, that's great, but that's just a plot. What's the story? And the thing he landed on at the end of the day was the story is the romance. The story, it's a love story ultimately. This is perhaps what I'm feeling is a person looking at a book about 11/22/63 about the Kennedy assassination and saying, what are we doing with this back and forth love story shit? And the answer is everything, because that's it. That's what we're doing. That's the
Yeah.
whole thing. And so this kind of back and forth is right at home in that kind of story. Well said. I completely agree with you.
No, it's really, I loved your phrasing just then when you said a guy goes back in time to stop the assassination. Well, that's just a plot. What's the story?
Mm-hmm.
That's just a perfect way of articulating like the way I've come to think about storytelling, where it's like, yeah, you've got to have some human level stakes.
Yeah.
That because we're really, I mean, and this story has really so far not taken its time to ground us in JFK.
Mm-hmm.
Still, and we remarked on that.
Yeah,
I do think it's just interesting that Sadie, as far as my calculations say, did not appear until week 5 of our conversations.
Yeah.
Which is pretty far into the book for this to be a book that you just can say this is a romance story. But I don't think it's ridiculous to say that either, though. I think it's kind of a standard big lanky Stephen King novel, but
Yeah.
but at the heart of it is this romance story. I agree with that.
Yeah, it just takes its time getting to what the actual story is,
Yeah.
which I think is very very tried and true for King. I also like perhaps thinking of it from a different perspective of like, and again, I haven't read a lot of romance novels, but I'm like, just osmosisly aware of the tropes and trends of those type of stories. And like the mysterious stranger coming in from out of town that sweeps the new girl off her feet thing
Mm-hmm.
is just like par for the course there. Normally those stories, however, are told from the perspective of the woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting that we've kind of flipped the switch a little bit here, flipped the rules a little bit. And this is from Jake's perspective.
Yeah, it is interesting. I agree.
Anyway, we kind of we kind of dove into something in a lot of detail here in the introduction. Oops, we've never done that before.
Oh no.
All that to be said, I am with you, and I really enjoyed this, and it is definitely a ramping up. I mean, we're ramping up both on the Kennedy side and on the Jody side, Sadie side. So I think it does feel like we're entering the final act of the story. And I think page wise, I think we're right on pace for that.
Yep.
All right, let's get into it quickly. Before we do that, though, we did just want to once again remind people that we are going to Bangor in, gosh, when does this episode come out, Matt? It comes out on the 30th. So 2 weeks. Is that right? Fuck. That's right, I think.
Okay.
2 weeks. We are 2 weeks away. 2 weeks and a few days away from our live trip to Bangor. It's all coming together. It's all, we've said this, like, you've all heard this before, but go buy tickets if you want to come, please. It's great. We're like, I think putting our final tabulations on how much money we're going to end up donating to the library, and it's a number that is way higher than we thought it would be, and that's just incredibly exciting. So thank you to all you ticket holders out there who have helped with this whole thing, and we can't wait to put on a great show for y'all.
Yeah, really exciting stuff.
But you can go to doofmedia.com/Kingslingers live, which will take you to all the information about the show, and the place where you can buy the tickets. I think there are still a couple 15, 16 last time I checked available. So still a few there. but get them, and we'll see you at the show. By the way, for those that already have tickets, there is a Reddit thread right now on our subreddit, that's r/Doof Media, where folks who are going to be attending are kind of talking about non-official meetups. Like I think we've said before, Matt and I are pretty booked solid throughout the weekend. We got lots going on. We'll be jumping a lot of places. We've had some people email us saying like, "Oh, we couldn't get in on the tour, but if you're around, buy you a drink or say hey or something." We're like totally booked up. I mean, obviously, if you see us like out about, you're allowed to say hello. But like we're not going to be able to go to probably any unofficial non Kingslingers live stuff, but that doesn't mean you folks can not hang out with each other outside of our pre-programmed stuff. So if you want to help arrange that, there are people having conversations and planning things over on the subreddit right now. It's pinned to the top of the Reddit, so go check that out, and hopefully you can get in touch and hang out with people. This is it's to come hang out with us, but it's also a bunch of King fans and Kingslingers listeners getting to hang out with each other. So we hope you guys take opportunity to do that.
Yep. I really, that's one thing that I am kind of looking forward to, is just seeing all the people meeting each other and being able to make that happen. Right.
Yeah. I started to kind of preface the weirdness of talking to a bunch of people that have listened to me for 100 hours by like telling more people that I do a podcast. Just as like, I started a new job about a month ago, and I told my new work about all this last week. And I usually like try to keep those parts of my life separate, but I'm like, I need to get used to all this stuff. So I'm just gonna, because someone asked me what I was gonna be doing on my vacation in Maine, and I was like, oh well, here you go. I'm gonna tell you. I'm just gonna throw it all out there for you. So I'm mentally preparing myself to say hello to 200 people. So
yeah, I think a few years ago it was more feasible for us to pretend that this was not an important part of our lives, but that ship has sailed.
Yeah, fair. All right, so yeah, that is Kingslingers live in Mayor. Oh my gosh, it's coming.
Yep.
All right, Matt, let's get into it. Let's begin with chapter 19. Our chapter begins with the long-awaited introduction of George de Mohrenschildt. I said I was going to...
I think it's just Mohrenschildt. Like, just say it like Mohrenschildt.
Oh my god, you've just unlocked a superpower for me. And now you'll notice throughout the script where sometimes I just call him George, and that's not because he and I are like close personal friends. It's just because I was like, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, and I feel like I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah,
Mohrenschildt. I love it. Now that you say it, I like see where it says that in there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it's more like child, right? But it's
sure
Mohrenschildt. Yeah,
but I think no one's gonna give me shit
right
about pronouncing it slightly off, because nobody has ever given me shit about pronunciations on podcasts before.
Never. No, they don't give you the benefit of the. I mean, they totally give you the benefit of the doubt.
So anyway, our chapter begins with George de Mohrenschildt, who might have encouraged or participated in Kennedy's assassination. And Matt, I love this guy's entrance into the book, and I love how this King describes this guy. It says right here, de Mohrenschildt was empty-handed and mounted the steps in front of the other two with his head up and his chest thrown out. He was tall and powerfully built. His graying hair was combed slantwise back from his broad forehead in a way that said, to me at least, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. For I am George. Jake later describes him as not dissimilar to an evangelist preacher. And you wonder with that kind of description, like he's peddling a lot of bullshit over the course of these chapters. How much of this does he actually prescribe to? Or how much of this is just, he's the type of person that loves like pushing and prodding and building people up and conning people? What do you think? What do you think of this guy's introduction?
Well, it's really not clear what his agenda is at this point.
Yeah.
Because it could be anything in that space of what you just described. I will say up front that the audiobook reader's interpretation of this character is a revelation. Justifies the existence of the whole book. One interesting choice is that the reader gives him an Austrian accent. In other words, he sounds like Arnold more than he sounds Russian, which I don't know. Maybe I have no idea if that's accurate. I don't really care because I love it. So it's this character who sounds like former governor of California.
I love him even more now. This is great. I'm never gonna not be able to hear that when I read it now. Thank you. Thank you for that gift.
Yeah. Yeah. So that just makes him even more kind of fun of a character than he already is. I mean, he's basically like Oswald is not a very charismatic villain. Oswald just sucks. This is
Yeah.
our like fun, charismatic, almost flag-esque villain
Yeah.
that's he's fun to watch. I don't know to what extent he's like really a villain, but he's clearly a manipulator. He's a seducer.
Yeah.
So
It's great because we've kind of been led to believe like this is the guy that's going to solve the central mystery of the plot for us, which is, was Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, or was he with someone else? Was he part of some greater plot or conspiracy, or what? And then we meet this guy, and we're like, oh no, this is the exact type of person who would be doing all those things that we actually don't want to be true, because that would complicate Jake's whole mission quite considerably. And so he provides no comfort in that regard at all.
yeah,
Also, just to say, like every other character in this book, this is a real guy, a real person. I don't know too much about him. I don't know, like I'm not like a Kennedy assassination scholar, so I just don't know. I know like the broad strokes, probably as much as Jake knew before he got involved in this whole thing. I know this guy was like the longest interview of the Warren Commission, I think,
mm,
which was the investigation done into the assassination. They talked to him for the longest, which kind of makes sense. He knew Oswald very well. He claimed he was out of the country during the assassination, by the way. That's what he said. And I think it's true. I don't know. Ask conspiracy theorists.
okay. Well, that would be a good thing for him to arrange if he were involved in the conspiracy.
Touche. Yeah, but I don't know much about him. I like but I think one thing we need to do is kind of attempt to divorce like the real life from this book. I know that's weird to do. We're gonna be talking at the end of this week's episode about historical fiction and the ways in which, you know, what historical fiction does and how it does it well, and what people like about it. But one thing that I think is easy to do sometimes when you're dealing with characters that are real people is get too caught up in the real person versus the character. And I mean, King is drafting from reality, but he's just making some of the stuff up too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't know where we're going yet, obviously, but
mhm.
King has in his mind some thesis of how involved George de Mohrenschildt was,
Mhm.
and that may or may not have anything to do with reality.
Yeah, I mean that is true. One of the things we still don't have answered here is, does King believe that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated John F. Kennedy? Because like that will determine pretty majorly how the finale of this whole thing is going to play out, right? Like if the whole time it's like, surprise, King's a conspiracy theorist and he doesn't actually believe that, and this book is his way of discussing that. That radically changes the ending, and we still don't know. I mean, intentionally, that's kind of left up in the air for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I look forward to seeing where we go. And you know, I also am not much of a JFK assassination scholar, so a lot of this information is new to me. And like after we
Mhm.
finish this book, I'm going to have to go find out some ground truth from some primary sources, I guess. But it's
Yeah.
like I think this is a subject matter that is famously resistant to um, ground truth being easy to find. So
Yeah, and we've gotten several listeners who have sent us some, documentaries and other things that are like great kind of companion pieces to this novel, dealing with the Kennedy assassination. And I am going to check those things out. I think I kind of made the decision at the beginning of this whole thing to be like, I feel like if I spend too much time researching the assassination itself, like it will distort my understanding and appreciation and perhaps an analysis of this book. So I kind of made the decision that like I'm going to go into this thing knowing what I know about that day in November, and that's it. I've broken that rule a few places, like when I looked up Marina Oswald and found out she was still alive, but for the most part, I've kept to that. So I think after the book is done, and perhaps in our final overview episode, is where we can spend some time looking into that, to those other bits of information and talking about that at the end of the novel instead of mixing it in as we go.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right, so George finds Lee Harvey Oswald reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, and Matt, here comes the first of several times this week where we, or at least me, find ourselves strangely agreeing with Kennedy assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, because I think Ayn Rand sucks. I don't like her books very much. And he says here he's just researching the enemy is what he says to George.
Well, Scott,
I know what you think. Come on. Let's do it.
Yeah, Scott's baiting me. Clearly. Also, so I don't. I probably have said this in some other podcast, but I was the kid who read everything that Ayn Rand ever wrote when I was in high school. I read a lot in high school because anyway, got really into her in high school, and then later kind of had a backlash in the opposite direction somewhat. And nowadays, I think just the perspective I think I mainly have when I think about Rand is not like about her philosophy or her novels, but sort of as her role as a historical voice, like this person raised in the USSR who came to America and just loved the freedom that America represents, really loved America the way only an immigrant can, right? Sees the best possible version of America, and thus it pains her to see where we falter. I think I also think it was probably a useful sort of corrective to a lot of the ideas of the intelligentsia in the time when she was writing these novels, because there was a lot, people didn't understand like what the USR was actually like, and
sure.
So she provided a lot of value in a lot of ways. But I think, and I think it's really interesting and appropriate that it show up in this book here, because this book is starting to get more and more into the ideological struggle of the mid 20th century, right? We focus, especially this week, I would say more so than any other week, we focus on Oswald and his particular obsession with communism and wanting America to become communist, and being a political activist. Like, he really is a political activist, and you can't just like set that aside from his character and be like, oh, he shot JFK because what? It's like, no, it was clearly rooted in his political sympathies, his specifically Soviet political sympathies.
Yeah.
So it's realistic and I think reasonable that we would have him really just delving into the politics of the age, including reading this book, which is obviously very famous, and probably all kinds of people brought it up to him. I'm sure Atlas Shrugged was super annoying to people like Oswald when it came out, right? Like they probably hated this book so much, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. And to be clear, like I have no stake in like Ayn Rand's politics or personal philosophy. I found the Fountainhead like not an enjoyable read. I just didn't like it. I thought it was boring and bad. But it was a long time ago when I read it, so maybe I should read. I've never read Atlas Shrugged, to be entirely transparent here. Never read it.
Yeah. Well, so the thing I'll say about both of those books is, Rand's. I say this as someone who actually likes Ayn Rand. Her heroes are always cardboard.
Yeah.
But her villains are always excellent, like fully realized 3-dimensional people who you will meet in your life. She really nailed some particular human tendencies to the page in the form of her villains. As far as that goes, I think that's a true statement. Mohrenschildt almost strikes me as a kind of a Randian figure. I almost feel like maybe King is. I don't want to say this too strongly because I don't like have any evidence to support it, but Mohrenschildt strikes me as being a lot like the character Ellsworth Toohey from The Fountainhead, and I can't help but wonder if King put Atlas Shrugged in this scene as a way of gesturing at like, here's my Randian antagonist.
I think you're 100% right there. It's just, it seems like the exact type of thing that King would like just tickle himself doing, that like I'm going to do this thing and then I'm going to gesture directly at this thing, but I'm not going to like come out right out and tell you it's happening, but
Yeah.
I will make it as transparent as I possibly can. And it goes back to the old like storyteller sitting in a bar or around a campfire telling a story, and like you can like see like the laughter behind his eyes as he like it's like, I'm doing this thing,
Yeah.
I'm out. Like it seems like a fun thing that he would do. So I
Yeah.
think you're right there.
And I know it's been a million years, but do you remember the character, the villain Ellsworth Toohey, who's this like, I mean, he's explicitly like a communist. He seduces, not literally, but he, philosophically seduces the the architect friend of Rourke,
Yep.
and he has this way of being like super flattering, just like Mohrenschildt, and like the more I think about it, the more similarities I see. So
Yeah, and I think you're right. I don't have like I have an emotional feeling of that character that seems to line up pretty well. So I'll agree with you there. You say the name Howard Rourke, and I just like immediately like I fucking hate that guy. I just hated him so much. And I don't think I'm supposed to hate him. I'm supposed
No,
to be
you're
like,
not.
oh, this is the best. This is the best human ever. And I'm like, no, he's an asshole. He's a fucking asshole.
Yeah, this is one of the things that's different about you and I, Scott.
we don't disagree about a lot of things, but yeah, this is definitely one of those things where we're like, yeah,
Yeah,
like,
that's okay though.
I'm sure we have a lot of Rand fans amongst our listeners, which is fine. I probably owe it to myself to read Atlas Shrugged at some point in my life.
Yeah, I mean, since we're on this tangent anyway, I think The Fountainhead is a better experience as a novel, and Atlas Shrugged is not.
Well, maybe I won't then.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like if you're going a kick of reading like important literature, maybe, but if you already didn't like The Fountainhead, you're not going to like Atlas Shrugged.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
I'll just watch the movie.
I'd never seen the movie actually, but
I heard it was just awful.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Didn't they make like 3 parts to it or something? It's something insane.
It's one of those 1,000-page books, so probably,
yeah. So Matt, though, it very clearly becomes clear very quickly here that George is like here to butter Lee up, like to make him feel good, to make him feel happy and accepted, and also to wind him up in a lot of ways. But I mean, the question we have is why? Like, and you kind of said this already, but we'll reemphasize it here. Like, what is this guy's plan? What is his motive? Like, is he like? There's a scene later in the chapters where he like says like, oh, someone should really just murder this guy, and it's like, is he doing that as just like people shooting the shit, like talking to each other and airing frustrations about the state of the world, or is he a little bit more slyly and pushing and trying to radicalize this young kid to do his bidding? We don't know, but it's all there. And again, this is horrible news for Jake.
Yeah, right. I mean, like you said, we don't know, but I think we lean heavily in that direction because it's sort of hard to it's sort of hard to imagine like why else would Mohrenschildt be wasting his time with this loser unless he had some goal in mind.
Yeah.
So
no, I think it is no accident that in this moment, like we emphasize kind of how much of a loser Oswald is. Like I love this here. Lee talked about Russia. He was long-winded and pompous. I wasn't very interested in his rap about how the communist bureaucracy had hijacked all the country's wonderful pre-war socialist ideas. He passed over Stalin's Great Purge in the 30s. Nor was I interested in his judgment that Nikita Khrushchev was an idiot. You could hear the same idle bullshit about American leaders in any barbershop or shoeshine parlor right here. Oswald might be going to change the course of history in a mere 14 months, but he was a bore. And I agree with you. Like that is here to make you, the reader, go like, okay, if this guy like sucks so much, he is an activist, as you said, yes, but like kind of a shitty one. He doesn't have charisma. He doesn't have like good ideas. He's just kind of parroting the ideas he's reading and not well. Like, why does this guy want to be friends with him?
Yeah, right. The whole situation stinks, to be honest. I mean, just the idea that like he meets Oswald in this way where you're like, I don't know this seems forced, and then he
Mm-hmm.
continues to want to hang out with Oswald one-on-one, even though Mohrenschildt is this incredibly charming person, and nobody likes Oswald. He has no friends.
Yeah.
So you're just like, yeah, this guy's clearly working him. But
Uh-huh.
to what end, we're not sure. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
even now, like, so I'm pretty sure Mohrenschildt is winding him up, but it's like, did Mohrenschildt actually want him to kill JFK is a different question.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
that's a very specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. No, definitely. I do love the refrain here of "I know it" that comes from Oswald. Like, Oswald goes on this rant that Jake describes as pompous and boring, and then George goes on his own kind of rant about the state of the world and the stupid Americans and all these things, and Lee's entire contribution to this whole thing is "I know it," just over and over again. "I know it," and it's like the perfect, like, you have nothing to say phrase. Like,
uh-huh.
you have no contribution. You have nothing to say here. I really liked that little tick.
No, I perfectly said, yeah, he doesn't know how to hold up his end of the conversation, and which once again emphasizes how much Mohrenschildt is just kind of carrying this interaction and tolerating his ineptness.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing that illustrates this the most is that they start talking about Cuba and how America wants to destroy it, about General Walker's anti-integration beliefs, and eventually about JFK himself. Ironically, Oswald opens this whole bit by saying, "I sort of like Kennedy," which is like the least committed opinion ever.
Uh-huh.
I sort of like the incredibly popular president, he says safely. Um,
Uh-huh.
so it's like, come on, man.
Yeah. And then he changes the opinion immediately, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
The interaction is basically, I kind of like Kennedy. And then Mohrenschildt goes, yeah, Kennedy appeals to stupid, dumbass Americans. And then Oswald is like, haha, yeah, Kennedy sucks. I
Yep.
am very smart.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is really interesting. Like, we spent a lot of time at this point with Oswald, and we see him as the monster, the wife beater, the anger control issues guy. I think we're spending a lot of time this week on Oswald the child, Oswald the inept. Like, it's interesting that we're spending this time kind of completely dismantling him as a person,
Yeah.
despite knowing that he is responsible for kind of single-handedly, maybe, changing the course of history.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're humanizing him. We're actually. I think this is a beat you might hit later, but I think we've been hitting it since last week. Actually, is this idea that Oswald and Jake are kind of being identified in various ways. They're sort of mirrors. They're sort of twinners in
Yep.
some ways,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yep.
and I think that's going to be doubled down on in a variety of ways this week. But I guess I'll just signpost one of them, which is like Jake is talking about how Oswald is going to change the course of history in 14 months. And that's one of the many things that you could flip back around and just be like, well, Jake, it's in a sense, it's you who's going to change the course of history.
Yeah.
Because the course of history is for JFK to die. So, so you are actually the one who's going to change the course of history.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, I guess you could make an argument, and we've spent a lot of time with Jake, and we like him, but like, he doesn't have any friends.
true.
His wife left him.
Before
Like,
the story, you mean, or just in
yeah,
general?
before the
Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, how cool of a person was Jake at the beginning of all this before history like opened its door and swept him into it? Like,
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of information about, like, I don't know. I'm not saying he's like a dull bore that has no opinions, but he also, like, I don't know. We don't see a lot of like political allegiances he had. Like, we don't just the pre-story Jake. We just know so little about him and
Yeah.
like what he believed. No, like, what did he want out of life? We don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't want to be too mean to him here, but I
Well,
think this mirror is intentional.
yeah, you're just quite correct to point out that he was so uninvested in his life that he had absolutely no problem just walking away from it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
When you're so detached from existence that someone says, "Oh, this would be the perfect person to send back to the 50s," and no one would notice, like, that says something about you for sure.
And to be, I don't know, balanced on this point, we have noted over and over that the people in Jody just love him.
Yeah. Hmm.
But like they also continually point out that there's something distant about him, and it's
Hmm.
like part of that is like, oh well, he's a time traveler, he's weird, but it's like it could just be more than that though. It could be more than just, oh, he says weird things every once in a while. It's like he is this kind of aloof person, setting
Yeah.
aside the time travel.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something there for sure.
Right.
So the end of this conversation, Matt, is that unfortunately there's nothing that makes it clear that George was not involved in the Walker assassination attempt and therefore the JFK one. But Jake uses this moment to decide to leave Fort Worth and the apartment he's living there and move to his new apartment in Dallas. He spends the next bit of time sleeping in Dallas but spying in Fort Worth as the Oswald's relationship continues to worsen. In the meantime, he continues to think about nothing but Sadie as we move into October and towards the Cuban Missile Crisis. Matt, I really love this section of the book because the thing that the book points out here is something that I'm guilty of as much as Jake is. I've never really thought about the Cuban Missile Crisis as anything more than just a historical event, right? Just a thing that happened that was one of the closest moments we got to just blowing each other up and ending the world. But I've always looked at it as this detached moment in history. I've never thought about what it must have been like to be an American or a Russian in the middle of this huge crisis that brought the world so close to that end. And I think Jake here compares it to 9/11, not in the event itself, but in the ways in which it like completely absorbed and terrified the general populace. And I love this what he says here. I'd made the stupid assumption that people were going to approach the Cuban Missile Crisis much like any other temporary international dust up. Because by this time I went to college. It was just another intersection of names and dates to memorize for the next prelim. That's how things look from the future. To the people in the valley, the dark valley of the present, they look different.
Yeah, I think this is great. I mean, it's something I never really thought about either much. Like, there's that one movie, 13 Days, with Kevin Costner,
Yeah, yeah, I've seen
and
that.
I think maybe another couple of other movies that are not specifically about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but maybe include that as a plot beat. And but I feel like all these dramatizations fail to really get you to think about the terrified reactions of the general public. I mean,
Hmm.
at least the Kevin Costner movie, I don't even remember. It's been a long time, so I could be wrong, but as far as I remember, it's like really focusing on the president and his advisors, and so you don't get a sense of like, what do people even know? Like, do people even know that this is happening?
Yeah,
Um, and I think the reality is, yeah, they did, and they were totally freaked out about it, but just not something I ever was aware of, really.
yeah, or just yeah. That I mean, when we tell the story of history, we usually tell the story of the political leaders of a country,
Hmm.
because normally because they're the ones like doing the history. But I think history from the perspective of just what it's like to be a person living during those events, I think is really interesting, and we don't do that as often, and we kind of get to do it here a little bit. Like we see how the general people react to everything happening in Cuba. I liked it.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
Um, so Sadie also is affected by this. Matt, Jake calls her on the phone, gets no answer, and then rushes to Jody, knowing that something is wrong. You took a shot last week, Matt. You said Sadie probably has cancer, or Sadie is pregnant, and you were wrong. It's okay, but you were wrong. It's just kind of simply Sadie is severely depressed, and as it turns out, kind of suicidal. And we see here that the panic of the missile crisis, including adding in the poison that her husband fed her with his doom saying, and good old Roger from Reno saying that some big event was going to happen in October or in the fall in Cuba. Like all this compounds in her in this moment. She takes one too many pills, mixes it with one too many drinks, and almost dies. Matt, what did you think about all this? I mean, knowing that you just got it so completely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this one was kind of mine to lose in a specific sense that we've been hitting this beat over and over that the past harmonizes. So the idea that Jake's new squeeze would become an alcoholic at some point was just right there.
Hmm.
Now, it's not quite that. I think I'm kind of waving my hands here because it's like she started drinking a lot more to deal with her anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And then the pills factored into it too. But it seems like she's able to kind of shake it off after Jake gets back into her life in a way that definitely wasn't true with Christy. So that was my main thought here was like, I could have foreseen part of this, and what I should
Mhm.
have thought of was the alcohol angle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd go so far as to say alcoholic, right? I think
Hmm.
yeah, a depression induced, bit of binge drinking, for sure.
But
That got her
yeah,
in trouble, and especially mixing it with those pills.
so
But like, I think even calling her suicidal feels like too far, because like I really honestly just don't believe she like meant to almost kill herself here. She just acted foolishly,
she's yeah
mixing
she
too many pills with too many drinks.
she's yeah, she's drinking too much, and so she's making stupid decisions. Like,
Yeah.
so the text doesn't say this explicitly, but my take was the thing that Jake was detecting on the phone that was off about her was that she was maybe a little drunk. Like maybe she's been operating, 2 drinks deep,
Interesting. Yeah.
throughout the workday, right? Like she was working as a cocktail waitress, right? So
Mhm.
wouldn't be that hard for her to just knock one back every hour or two, just to keep the edge off. And it's like
Yeah.
that's kind of the gray area between full blown alcoholism and problematic, starting to have a problem drinking, I guess.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think you're wrong there. I've always like I've never focused on the drinking part of it as much as just the depression part of it.
Hmm.
That she's just really really sad, and he's detecting some kind of detached depression on the line. But yeah, I mean, it could be detached depression mixed with a few drinks. I think you're right. Like that works so well because of the harmonization factor that you already mentioned. That just like it seems to fit this ongoing motif in the story. That it's another significant other of Jake. Like we get, even in the scene, we get that harmonization, right? As he is having to help her into the shower to wake her up. He's like, oh yep, I've done this before. This all feels very familiar to me, actually. So it's definitely there. So no, I like that. I've never thought about that way, but I like it.
All right, cool.
Yeah. So I do want to point something out here that I find interesting, is that with this whole thing, it just like, we talked about how when they first met, Jake was like the perfect person for Sadie, because Sadie was kind of forever damaged by this incredibly unhealthy and dated view on sexuality, brought about by her crazy husband, but also just the culture of the time. And how Jake was kind of the perfect person for her in this moment, because he doesn't have any of that cultural baggage and sees all the things that she stresses about as no big deal. And so here at the second phase of their relationship, we kind of get this again. Not only does he have a lot of experience in finding a person passed out after having drunk too much and possibly mixing it with pills, and knows exactly what to do because he's had that experience with his ex-wife, but he also is literally the only person on the planet that has the ability to calm her down about the Cuban Missile Crisis, because he is the only person on the planet in this moment that knows exactly how this whole thing is going to be resolved. He could get John F. Kennedy on the phone with Sadie to try to calm her down about this whole thing, and he would be worse at it
Uh-huh.
because he doesn't know, but our guy here knows. And that
Uh-huh.
like is one of those things that just feels like, again, it feels like if we want to call it the past, if we want to personify it, if we just want to call it existence, pushing and prodding and getting involved, it feels like that to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. It lines up. It lines up really well, and it kind of reminds me of something we've talked about before. The idea that like he's wrong about what his purpose is.
Mhm.
Like he seems to provide a lot more value on this interpersonal basis, not trying to be
Yeah.
secret agent man.
Yeah. No, I think you're I think you're right there. Um and so he does kind of outline everything for her here, Matt. Like he tells her essentially what's going to happen, like in detail. Well, in as much detail as he can remember from school. which frankly is more than I had in my memory bank. So it's actually pretty impressive. Like I think he's like he doesn't know exactly what day. It's like it's probably gonna be like Wednesday or Thursday, but then they're gonna reach out, and it's like, wow, like I definitely studied the Cuban Missile Crisis in school. I do not have the recall that he has. So very impressive, Jake.
Yeah. Wow. I feel like I could write down everything I know about the Cuban Missile Crisis in like a third of a page. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't remember all these details of
Mhm.
timelines and stuff. I would just be like, yeah, it all turns out fine. They somehow the Russians back down.
Yeah, the thing I did remember was the fact that the Russians like quickly realized that they were in over their head and didn't actually want this,
Hmm.
and like back channeled a message to Kennedy that like, hey, if we can all agree to get out of this thing without any of us looking weak, that would be preferred.
Yeah.
Like I remember that part of it, but like the details of it and like which newscaster that they back channeled through to get the message to Kennedy, like not a
Yeah.
thing I remembered at all.
Yeah. I think my recollection of that is that they got the Russians to remove the Cuban missiles, and in exchange, I think we removed some missiles from like Turkey or
Yep,
something.
yep, yep.
And but we didn't let anybody know that we did that. But that was the compromise.
Yep,
So
yeah,
yeah, no, like so to speak to your point that he kind of tells her but sort of doesn't. I actually like how this is handled because he tells her without explaining,
yeah, yeah,
and for the rest of the chapters that we talk about this week, we see that she has clearly just put two and two together because she'll just at certain points be like, it's almost here, isn't it, the thing that you came here to stop or whatever. I don't think she
yeah,
says it in quite those words exactly, but like she's figured it all out. She's not figured out like who he's here to save. She's not, but like, and she's not even necessarily 100% sure that he's a time travel from 2011, but she knows that he's here for some purpose and that he knows things about the future. And you can kind of be like, isn't that kind of enough? Like, does he need to tell her everything, or was this enough? I kind of feel like this was enough.
that's fair. Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, I like tell me you're a time travel without telling me you're a time traveler. Like
Yeah,
is basically what happens here, right? Like
yeah,
it's like I know all this details of all this stuff, exactly how it's going to happen. I'm here for a specific purpose, and I know the exact day that that's going to be. But I can't tell you where got it from.
I find this also just a lot more dramatic and satisfying than if he had like been like, all right, Sadie, here are who's going to win the next 6 basketball games. like like this is just works way better narratively, I think.
Sure, sure. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah, but she does as this whole conversation comes to a close is they sleep together again and I guess are just back together, and I'm happy about that. I really am. I promise. I'm going to say some things in the next chapter that's going to make it seem like that's not true, but I just want to say here at the beginning, I'm very happy because I like these two characters and I like them together. But there it is.
Yeah, there it is. We'll circle back around. No, yeah, I mean, I think we all know that this can't end well, but at least they're happy for now.
Hmm.
I say
Yeah.
that because of the incessant lampshading of like, Sadie, God, how I loved her. Past tense. Everything's past tense.
Look, there's a lot of lampshades on that lamp now.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, there are.
there's just an excessive amount of lampshades.
It's
Yeah.
very lampshaded. Yeah,
Um, I do like that she asks him, and like you said that she kind of maybe knows that he's a time traveler. But I do like that she's like, just tell me one thing. Are you human?
uh-huh.
Are you from planet Earth? Which is a very funny thing, and like a fair question to ask,
Yeah.
I
I
guess.
think it's like she doesn't want to ask him to over explain, but she kind of wants to be like, all right, I want to narrow the scope of how weird the situation is that I'm in.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if he was literally an alien, then that might be a little bit of a deal breaker. But nope, just a man from the future.
What would you do? Like in her like what would you do if your girlfriend's a time traveler, Matt? What would you do?
I almost feel like that is an entirely separate and equally fun premise for a book, honestly. Like, because I wouldn't be able to just pretend that everything was fine. I would not at all be able to just be like, okay, let's just go back to normal. I would constantly be trying to tease out information. It would probably be really annoying, actually.
They did make a book about that, Matt. It's called The Time Traveler's Wife.
Oh, okay. I
I
never read
didn't
it,
see
but
it. I
yeah.
didn't read it, but I did watch the movie. And here's my interpretation of what the conflict in The Time Traveler's Wife is.
Okay.
I love you. I love you too. By the way, I'm a time traveler. Okay. I don't care. Rest of the novel. It turns out I really did care that you're a time traveler. Why can't we be together? Well, because I travel through time uncontrollably.
Uh-huh.
I told you about that at the beginning of our relationship.
Uh-huh.
You can't be mad at me for being a time traveler.
This is a metaphor.
I don't remember. Like, there's probably some Time Traveler's Wife fans in the I don't know, in the listening right now that are very upset with me. But that's my interpretation of Rachel McAdams being extremely mad at Eric Bana for traveling through time, despite getting into the relationship fully knowing he was traveling through time.
Yep, tale as old as time.
It's also really weird because he visits her when she's a child,
Uh-huh.
and he like has all the memory of them falling in love and being together, but she's a child. It's a little weird.
Yeah, that is a little weird. Now that you described the movie, by the way, I realize that I have seen it and just forgot about it. So.
Well, good. I hope you completely agree with my very informed critique of The Time Traveler's Wife.
That sounds about right, to be honest.
All right, Matt. Chapter 20. As we say at the beginning of this chapter, the Cuban Missile Crisis gets Sadie and Jake back together. They're happy. We're happy. But not everyone's happy. Ellie, for instance, is not happy at all. And Matt, I mean, she does kind of have a point here. Because none of Sadie's reasons for calling it off with Jake are resolved, right? Jake hasn't acquiesced to any of her demands. There's still a broom in the bed with her. She's just kind of decided that she doesn't care enough about it anymore. And that's a fair decision to make. Sure. Like, you go into a relationship, you got some things at the beginning, some worries. You ignore them because you're in the honeymoon phase of the relationship. They continue to stack up, and eventually you just kind of go, oh, it turns out these are big deals for me anyway, and you call it off. And then, time goes by and you get yourself in a place where you're like, actually, upon reconsideration, I don't think those things were as important to me as I thought they were. Like, that can happen, like in real life, right?
Yeah.
I do think that it is interesting and intentional that when discussing their kind of new policy towards this, which is just, she's just like, I'm just not going to ask you any questions about it. I've decided I'm okay with it. I'm not going to ask anything. Jake says, don't ask, don't tell. And then Sadie later repeats that phrase to Ellie, not understanding where it came from or the meaning. Just for those that may have forgot, don't ask, don't tell is the stupid as fuck military policy that was put in to basically avoid making any decisions on whether gay people should be allowed to be in the military. They're just like, we just won't ask you, and you will just live your entire life in secret, and that's the solution. We did it. We solved it.
Incredible leadership.
Yeah, just so great.
Our policy is to brush this under the rug officially.
God, that wasn't even that long ago. Is the wild thing.
It is wild. Yes.
But my point here, though, is that like the intentional callback to that stupid, dumb, as you said, horrible leadership decision is, I think, to make us kind of on Ellie's side a little bit with this. It's like, none of the issues here have been resolved. I'm happy you're back, but all the same problems are here. Isn't this bad? Like, it's good, but also, isn't it bad?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure that I disagree because like, it's more like, I think it is kind of gray. Like, he's tipped his hand to her rather,
mm-hmm.
way more than he has to any other person in the past.
Sure.
And I mean, if he were to say to her, I'm here to save JFK because he's going to be assassinated. Um, does that really add? I mean, yes, it obviously adds clarity because she understands the situation, but does it add enough clarity to really make a difference? I mean, one could argue that the broom has been removed from the bed, metaphorically speaking, but she can't explain this to Ellie because she can't be like, because the conversation would basically be like, yes, he has explained the weird stuff, and then Ellie would be like, oh, and and what was the explanation? And then Sadie would go, um, I can't tell you, which probably sounds even worse to Ellie, actually.
Yeah,
Like if that were to happen, right?
sure.
So I don't really know. I don't really know.
He hasn't actually explained the weird stuff, though. I mean, he he just told her a lot about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's true. I that's true. I think what I'm doing in my head is in my mental model of Sadie, she has just like correctly deduced the truth, and
Sure.
it's not
Okay.
much of a problem for her anymore.
Fair. Yeah.
Which is admittedly not the same thing as Jake telling her.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that's an important clarification because it wasn't necessarily I need to know all the details about you. It's you are keeping things from me and you are choosing to keep a part of yourself from me. And that is putting a distance between us that is insurmountable.
Mhm.
And so you need to be, it's more about him feeling comfortable enough to be straightforward with her. And I don't think he's quite there. I think we get there.
Mhm.
Um, I'm because like I think it is important a little bit later in the chapter where he tells her his real name. Like that is a sign of he's starting to open up a little bit more
Yeah.
about who he is. Because like I don't know, like I feel like there's ways he could tell like stuff about him that she was asking about without being like I'm a time traveler. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh on him, but
And
I just feel like we are supposed to feel this level of uncertainty towards whether we should be happy about this or not. And I feel like the end of this week's reading reinforces that like they got back together, yay, and then look what happened.
yeah, and no, I think basically like thematically you're right on the money because I think this ties together a bunch of the stuff we've talked about today too, where it's like Jake is actually this very distant, emotionally repressed character. The first thing we
Hmm.
learn about him is that his emotions are kind of distant from him. Then we learn that he has this ex-wife who was an alcoholic and he divorced. And I think at some point, I didn't say this with a lot of conviction, but I was like, maybe he had a role to play in that. I'm not saying he was the reason why she drinks, but perhaps it was the fact that the man that this woman married turned out to be incredibly emotionally distant and sort of self-contained, did not help with whatever she had going on in her life,
Yeah,
and she,
yeah.
and she felt alone. Like maybe she would have nodded along if somebody described the situation as having a broom in the bed, even though at the time he didn't have any terrible secrets. It was that's just his nature.
Yeah.
He's a closed off person. So
Hmm.
now he has these secrets, um, which he could just tell her the answer to some of these. Like he could have long ago just been like, "Yeah, I'm divorced." Like that would have been super easy.
Yeah, you could
um,
talk about Christy
yeah, yeah, yeah.
without the detail of oh, but she's that this happened in 2011.
Exactly. So exactly my point. So like he continues to be unnecessarily closed off and secretive in ways that are not really justified by his being a time traveler. I
Hmm.
think that's totally there. I agree
Yeah.
with all of that. To the extent that I was nitpicking anything, it was just like, I mean, he did tell her stuff that he could only know if he's a time traveler. But he's still being weird about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you're onto something that like he's told her in so much detail that like it's either you're a time traveler or an alien, and I asked you if you were an alien, and you said no,
Yeah.
so it must be option B.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Regardless of how we feel about it, Jake begins what he calls his double life. He spends the weekends in Jody with Sadie, and then the weekdays spying on Oswald in Dallas. And one thing I wanted to talk to you about here, it mentions on the way back from Jody at the end of one of these weekends, his car throws a rod as quote, as if expressing its own opinion that we were driving in the wrong direction. This is actually something we haven't touched on, Matt. That's been happening over the past few weeks as we read these chapters, like Jake's aging car and how King is using it as a symbol as we approach the end of Jake's mission here. Like when he first got this car back in 1958, he went for like this kind of loud, bright symbol of the 50s, right? It was this 1958, this is this perfect land of opportunity and freedom that he's seeing as an escape from his complicated life in the present. And that was this car to him. And is this quote unquote vintage in his mind, red sports car. And now, after living in the past has become just living, the degradation of the car over time and kind of crystallizes this shift in him and in his life and in what living in the past actually is. I think is just a perfect symbol of this. As the car wears out and eventually dies and needs to be replaced, it is the last vestige of this escapist fantasy of time traveling.
Yeah, starting to look like it would look if he had just bought it in 2011. Although he's still got a lot of years left, clearly. But,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's also been a long time since he waxed poetic about how stuff just tastes better in the past, and
yeah.
the air smells fresher. It's like he. It could just be that he doesn't feel like writing that down every time he thinks about it, but I think it's more the case that he's just gotten used to it, and this is just his world. It
Yeah,
doesn't feel like anything to him anymore.
yeah. One of the ways that King does that and illustrates that I think is really interesting. I didn't write this down in the notes, but I was thinking about it over the last couple weeks. The language that Jake uses, I think, is particularly interesting to me because we've been told and we see through Sadie and through his interactions with other people that he will use wrong phrases or out of date or not of the time phrases that make people feel he's peculiar in times, but he will on occasion say stuff that is incredibly 1950s and 60s. The one that really jumped out to me last week was when he went to the airport to see Oswald arrive and just Sadie just so happened to be leaving. He described her as walking up to the Negro porter to hand her a suitcase.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a term that anyone in 2011 would use to describe a black person, right? We talked about this when we talked about Drawing of the Three with Odetta Holmes and the shift of the politically correct term to refer to black people, right? And how that's shifted and changed over time. That was not a term that in 2011. It's not a term now. It was a term back then, and it would have been an acceptable way of referring to a black person. And that to me speaks of internalization of the world and the culture and just living in this time period. I feel like this is done intentionally and very subtly because I don't think the book really necessarily shines a light on it, but like he is kind of adapting to this place in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he's a lot less bothered by some of the stuff that I think might have bothered him when he came here
Yeah.
fresh, right? Um, Not that we're specifically seeing these things, but I guess we just spend less story moments with him sort of reacting with discomfort to things. It's just like, yeah, this is kind of the way people are, I guess.
Yeah. Probably similar to the way like a more progressive liberal minded person would have reacted at the time. It was like, hey, I don't like that. That's not good.
Yeah.
But not any kind of like, yeah. I mean, I'm recalling like the first time he looks for an apartment in Dallas and like is so disgusted by the landlord's like immediate racism that he's just like, I have to leave. I can't live here. I have to get out of this entire city. And now he's just living in Dallas. It's because he has to, but he is living there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
So the more feelings of happiness here return as we get this just wonderful holiday scene. Deke and Ellie are invited over to Sadie's for dinner, and although Ellie is kind of cold, at first. Like they kind of all open up to each other, and it's like there's a lot of moments in this book, Matt, that are just like, "Aw, this makes you feel really good and happy." And I think King does a very good job with these.
Yeah.
I really, in particular, like this phrasing here. Like Jake is talking about how Ellie, for their kind of blessing of the food, kind of directly references the elephant in the room, and wants Ellie to be more understanding of her relationship with Jake. And I just love this. He says Sadie could be vulnerable, and Sadie could be clumsy, but Sadie could also be very, very brave. How I loved her.
Yeah. A lot of past tense there going on there,
Yeah,
Jakey boy.
yeah.
But it's beautiful. It's beautiful stuff. There's these wonderful moments with these side characters that I think really give the book a more pleasant
Hmm.
feeling than it otherwise would have. Like if,
Yeah.
in other words, if you stripped out a lot of these side characters and side plots, this would be a very grim, borderline unpleasant sort of death march of a story to
Yeah.
get through. So
Yeah, especially given how we end this week, right? Like you need the moments of joy and happiness and warm and fuzzies to get through the tough stuff, and that the tough stuff is coming for sure.
yeah, yeah.
So on the other side of things, we see that Lee and Marina Oswald now living in Dallas, but not yet above Jake. And I think this is we kind of teed this up already, but I do think that we are at least trying to somewhat compare the Jake and Sadie relationship with the Lee and Marina one. Correct? Do you agree with this?
Totally. I mean, I think even Jake himself might be somewhat drawing these contrasts. Actually, now that I say that, I can't really remember any specific instances of him drawing the contrast, but it does seem um, comparisons and contrasts, right? Because
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
he's got some weird things in common with Lee.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that is there for that reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm really, really fascinated with this part, Matt, though, where Lee is getting violent with Marina publicly. He's yelling at her, he's screaming at her, he's threatening her, and Jake is just kind of across the street silently watching this whole thing. And this woman comes up to Jake and is basically like, "Hey, he's gonna beat that woman. He's gonna hurt her. Like, do something, help her." And he, of course, can't. He won't. He can't do that. And I just fascinated by like what we're trying to say with this, because I do think it's a thing that King has referenced often in his novels, like the good people kind of standing by and doing nothing. I mean, I think this is a huge part of it, right? There's a
Mm,
huge thing in Derry of just like we're gonna look the other way. We're not gonna intervene. We're not gonna step in. We see bad things happening. We see violence, and it's the Derry way to just say nope, can't do anything about that. That's not my business. So I feel like obviously there's like a plot reason for it here, but in the end of the day, he's standing there watching a man beat his wife and not doing anything.
well, now we know every time there's a character in a King novel that refrains from intervening in domestic violence, it's because they're a time traveler trying to avoid the butterfly effect. So
No, you're right. You're right.
now we've resolved it. Um,
And furthermore, this just makes a point I was going to say later, but anytime anything bad happens to you in life, it is because someone nearby you was attempting to change the past, and the past was putting you in harm's way or making something bad happen to you to stop them. So we know
yeah,
that now too.
we know that now too. I mean, I think it's yet again, maybe this is more of a stretch, but I feel like this has kind of become a hobby horse for me. And I don't even know if this is what the book is trying to say, but Jake is at his best when he's doing these mundane little interventions in people's daily lives. Like
Yeah. Hmm.
that is to me like who he is as a person. He is when he's at his most heroic. Actually, is when he's talking to some high school kids and helping put them on the right track.
Yeah.
And like maybe he should have stepped in here. Maybe him stepping in and confronting Lee Harvey Oswald about beating his wife um, would have made a difference to history. Maybe Lee Harvey Oswald would have been like, wow, I really need to get my shit together and stop drinking and stop hanging out with this Mohrenschildt guy. And like, I'm only being slightly joking here because it's like he has so many opportunities to intervene in so many ways, but he refrains from doing so because he's worried about the butterfly effect. And it's like, man, got this backwards. Butterfly effect all over the place, man.
Yeah.
Like improve the world with your presence, you know?
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That kind of echoes something I was thinking about this week, which is this idea that, like, we attempt, when we talk about changing the world, and in this case changing history, we go macro always, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the one big event, the one big thing that if we fix this thing, then it will change the world and improve humanity, and everything will be better. But really, like, that's not how people work actually at
Mm-hmm.
all. And like the best thing a individual person can probably do is care for and help the people directly adjacent to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and if everyone did that, like, collectively things would be better. It sounds a little corny, but collectively things would be better. And it's like Jake makes this choice essentially at the end of this week's reading, right? Like, he it needs to observe Lee try to assassinate this guy to confirm that it's him, so he can stop him from assassinating Kennedy. But he chooses to help the person who is being beaten by their ex-husband now. It's not Lee and Marina this time. It's Johnny and Sadie,
Mm-hmm.
and he makes the choice to step in and change things. And like I like that feels like the right choice, and I agree with you. Like, the way you change the future is the small things that you can do around you. Like I just feel like that's just true. And
Yeah.
like I love that we're seeing that. And again, like, I think this book is being so clever because I really don't think King comes right out and says these things directly. I think he just wants us to absorb them and think about them kind of subtextually,
Mm-hmm.
and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's genuinely one of those things that I think has slightly shifted my sense of like what I would do if I were a time traveler, which sounds silly because I'm not going to be a time traveler, but like what you go through life and you kind of think like, well, this is this is what you would obviously do, and not that I've ever thought that I would stop the JFK assassination, but you do tend to think in these like grand terms, and you
Hmm.
kind of realize like you don't know what the impact of that is going to be generally. Like
Hmm.
this is probably a horrible butchering of the metaphor, but like the reason Al picked JFK was because it's this watershed moment, and it's like, okay, but that water's got to go somewhere. like like
Hmm.
like what, like you're changing history. Are you necessarily improving history? It's kind of unclear actually.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
saving one man's life. I think that's unambiguously good. But we've seen, I don't know, I feel like I'm repeating points we made in previous episodes, but we've actually seen that when Jake intervenes and causes one good thing to happen, sometimes a bad thing happens
Yeah.
to kind of offset it, right? So
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the question is, if saving the future requires you to allow a person to get beaten by their husband, is that a good thing? Like,
mhm,
like what are we doing at that moment? Like, it's like we start playing these ticky tacky games of like the greater good, right?
mhm,
And whenever we get into those conversations, I'm like, I starting to roll my eyes because, again, that's not how human beings actually operate in day to day life. Like, the just maximizing like value. Like, no, you see a person like getting beaten up, you step in
yeah,
because that's the right thing to do. And it's not like, well, but if I go to work instead of helping this person, my job will help 1,000 people. So obviously my time is better served walking away from this person being beaten up. Like, nobody actually makes calculations like that.
yeah. You got to maximize global utility. No, you're totally right. The choice of JFK becomes increasingly interesting. I mean, maybe this was already obvious, but just like it's not like he's stopping 9/11,
Hmm.
because that would be really hard to argue, or like stopping Pearl Harbor or something where it's like, wait, so you're saying that we shouldn't save thousands of people? It's like, no, no, that would be a different conversation, because like it's just sort of unambiguously really like it's much harder to argue um that you should throw away your chance to stop 9/11
Yeah.
um to save one person from being beaten. than it is to argue that I'm mangling this. What I'm trying to say is the JFK assassination is almost like a uniquely ambiguous historical event when it comes to like what is its impact going to be.
Yeah, yeah,
It's gonna save the life of JFK, and
yeah,
then what? And then what? We have no idea. In fact,
yeah,
it may not even save the life of JFK because if there's a conspiracy, somebody else is going to get him potentially.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about this at the very beginning, but I think it is worth emphasizing again here that like we're all running under the assumption that hey, this was a good leader and a good person, and therefore him not being dead surely means things will be nebulously better.
mhm.
Yeah, Vietnam probably wouldn't happen, or at least happen the same way. Sure, but yeah, it's guesses, it's conjecture. We don't actually know. We want it to be true, um, because it was this moment where we felt that everything changed. As you said, a watershed moment, everything changed, and so we want to believe that if we prevent that moment, that things will not change that way, and therefore will be better. But we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I
Instead, you
don't
should
know.
just step in when a man's beating his wife in public. Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe that should be just like the general rule of existence and humanity. Is like you should never say that's his business because that's ridiculous.
yeah. Was a small part of you going, hey, lady, why don't you do something about it?
I mean, that's just the 1960s, right? It's like, hey, man,
Yeah,
you do this.
yeah.
I
No,
can't do it. I'm a woman.
I know, and the truth is that the she was basically correct given the times and so forth. But
Yeah, yeah.
um, it was just the thought that went into
No,
my
I
head.
mean you're not wrong. I don't.
Yeah,
I don't think I remember that specifically popping in my head, but you're not wrong.
yeah, yeah.
So after this altercation, Marina moves out, though we know only temporarily, and George de Mohrenschildt and his wife are sent to gather the rest of her things. And I really like this, Matt. This thing echoes something we were talking about earlier. Um, Jake looks at Lee and it says, I realized with a mixture of pity and revulsion that the boy, that's all he really was, really, had begun weeping. And again, this is something that the book is pushing more and more of, Matt. We'll go from here and see Lee attempting to organize a protest against General Walker's appearance on TV. We get to see a copy of the document that he's put together. It's littered with both spelling errors and just incorrect vocabulary. We see now Lee Harvey Oswald as this person, this child who is desperate to be important, who feels like he should be important. He's desperate to matter, and yet through his awful mother and upbringing, he's been like basically given none of the tools to impact change actually in any of the ways he wants to. Like he's completely failed in starting any kind of movement whatsoever. He's just not good at any of this stuff, and that it's beginning to form the mold of a person that could be pushed or could become an assassin essentially.
Yeah. It could easily be influenced by somebody like Mohrenschildt,
Yep.
for
Yep.
one thing. Not that we still don't quite know 100%, but I mean, I really feel like that's the direction we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Just another thing to point out, of course, is that Lee is weeping here, something that Jake would never do.
Oh
I
my god,
mean,
that I didn't even consciously pick that. Maybe this is why I I highlighted the section in my book without even knowing it. No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
yeah, it's just another contrast between them, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it, love it. Um, so once again, Matt, we have this interesting thing that happens here. Jake kind of turns on the TV and watches General Walker's appearance on the television show that Lee wanted to arrange a boycott of, and we see that he fucking sucks. He
Hmm.
sees a racist asshole. Like we talked, I don't even remember what book it was, but we talked about this interpretation of the biblical story of Noah getting drunk and the one son observing his father's drunkenness and therefore cursed to be servants forever. And this is taken by some idiots as like the biblical support for why the black race is inferior. Just bullshit nonsense, right? So we see Walker echo this, and it's just I think it's really interesting that like Lee is constantly spouting about like this anti integration person, this racist that just hate hate black people and all like and women and are backwards and it's like King knows that us reading in 2011 think all these things that Walker believes are bad, right?
Hmm.
We know this for sure now, and the world has moved on from, well, not entirely, but the sane world has moved on from a lot of these opinions. And so he's setting this up in a really interesting way where we're like, wait, this is the quote unquote good guy, um, that our bad guy or antagonist Lee is trying to stop, and we're like, what are we doing here? Actually,
Yeah, I totally agree. That's what we're trying to set up here. Is like maybe you just feel a little bit of empathy or sympathy for Oswald's desire to take this guy
yeah,
out, because I mean that's kind of what's interesting is Oswald goes on these rants from time to time in the text, and it's like, he'll be talking about how communism is great, and then he'll be talking about how segregation is terrible, and you're like, oh, you're tearing me apart, Lee. Like, because I'm just like, well, you can kind of, and his like you just pointed out, his first target is this guy who's it's not that he's anti-communist specifically, is that he's like a racist, and it's like,
hmm
okay, well, I guess I feel complicated about this.
yeah. Well, and their hatred specifically of the NAACP as like they believe this is this communist front that's going to like sneak the evils of socialism into our country because black people want to be treated as people. This is incredibly radical communist idea, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's really clever because yeah, it puts us on our heels a little bit because you're like, you know, this is a he's a wife beater, he's a horrible person, we do not like him, but like, oh yeah, he supports a lot of things which at the time would have been extremely progressive, I guess we'll call it that, and now are just like the the hopefully normal accepted thing that everyone believes,
yeah.
um
It's I guess one thing, just to step back from it, that I think is interesting, and you tell me if this was not your experience, but for me, reading this book, I maybe this is going to make me sound super ignorant and dumb, but I'm like, wait a minute, Lee Harvey Oswald was like a huge communist. Like, I didn't, like, you'd think this would be like the front and center thing of like, yes, JFK was assassinated by of an overt and out and active a communist partisan
yeah.
whose name happened to be Lee Harvey Oswald. Like, but that's not the way I was taught it, as far as I can remember. I mean, like, what was your level of knowledge about this before reading this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that like I'm certain at the time it was like right like you do also kind of wonder, this guy's an outspoken communist and assassinates the president, and they're like, oh, was this a conspiracy by the Soviet Union to take out our leader? Like, I'm sure those kind of conversations and those kind of um things were investigated, but no, I guess I'm answering the question longly, but the short answer is no. Like, I did not have specific like awareness of Lee Harvey Oswald was like super socialist, loved communism, like loved all these things. Like, I actually I didn't, none of the history that told me about the assassination of JFK ever really focused on who Lee Harvey Oswald was as a person. Like, I didn't even learn the stuff about, oh, he was in Russia before he came back to the US until I read this book. Like,
Yeah,
it's not something I ever knew
right.
at all.
I mean, this is not me, endorsing specific conspiracy theories, but when you just step back and you look at everything, you're like, oh, this was totally a Soviet plot. Like it just, like, if you were in 1963 and you got the information that the president had been assassinated, and you further got one page of information about who his assassin was, you would just be like, oh, the Soviets killed JFK. That would be that would be your immediate thought, right?
Yeah,
Let,
yeah. This
let's,
guy goes to Russia, spends a few years there, marries a woman there, then comes back to the US because he's dissatisfied with
Uh-huh.
with the Soviet Union's ideals,
Yeah.
and then magically, a little bit later, he just assassinates the president. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I mean, this is why the Kennedy assassination is so ripe for these kind of conspiracy theories, because you start looking under the surface of this thing even a little bit, and you're just like, huh,
Hold on a second.
huh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Ultimately, I don't know, but I do think it's weird that and I'm not like I'll take full responsibility for this of not being fully aware of the full details of all this stuff. Like, I'm not saying it's society's fault for failing to teach this to me, but yeah, no, it is interesting that I agree with you that I didn't know these things about Lee Harvey Oswald really at all until I read this novel.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's very weird and strange to me that we didn't learn this in school, because it just seems really relevant to
Maybe
the
this is
actual.
kind of a result of the rampant conspiracy theory stuff, and the backlash to that is we're so terrified of presenting anything that could lead someone to start buying into conspiracy theories of what really happened here, that we try to minimize the amount we actually teach about it. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up at
Yeah,
this
I
point. I have
mean,
no idea.
just to go ahead and fully lose everyone, like I think if you're living in the early 60s and you're like, okay, this could get really bad really fast if the
Hmm.
Soviets really did kill JFK.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's make sure, let's turn the propaganda knob up to the maximum to say this was a lone gunman. He was just some crazy stupid kid, and he's dead now anyway, so it doesn't matter. And it's over. Okay, everyone, it's over. This is not going to escalate. Regardless of what the truth is. Like, you can imagine getting behind that as a policy of just we're
Yeah.
like, we just had the Cuban Missile Crisis. That just happened. Now the guy's dead by a guy with Russian sympathies. Let's just move on. Let's just put that all in the past. It's all in the past. It's all in the
Yeah.
past.
God, I swore we were not going to get into the conspiracy theory shit before we started this book, but I agree with you. We're not concluding on what actually happened or what we believe or any of that stuff, but no, I agree with you.
Yeah. Well,
It's interesting.
I think the book requires just a little bit of dipping our toes in.
Sure.
So,
Fair. That's fair. That's fair.
um,
So Matt, the chapter ends with one more surprise. Marina Oswald is pregnant again, and we get this line: Al's notes had said nothing about this development, either because he didn't know or he didn't care. But I cared. This struck me because I got to thinking about this, and I was like, as I was thinking about it, one thing I realized was, oh, Jake doesn't actually know Al at all.
yeah.
Like, before this whole thing, they were chef and customer acquainted, where he
Mm-hmm.
was a regular at his establishment, and I'm a regular at the coffee house near my house. They know my name and they know my coffee order, but they don't know who I am.
Uh-huh.
They don't know me at all. Just like Al doesn't know, and I don't know them. I know their names. I know the owner of the coffee store because I'm there a lot, but they don't know each other. And so Jake really didn't know this guy at all.
Yeah.
Got swept up into this whole thing, and there's a version of him, the most he knows of him is from this Lee Harvey Oswald Bible that he put together, right?
Yeah.
Is and he's forming his entire image of who this guy is from a couple days worth of interactions about this time travel thing, and then this Bible. And it just really struck me in this moment of as he's deciding here what Al did and did not care about. And it seems like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, let me know, but I picked up some judgment from Jake towards Al in the incompleteness of some of these things,
Mm-hmm.
and the incorrectness of some of these things. It's oh, clearly he didn't care about this. Clearly he wasn't worried about Marina at all and her well-being. It's clear to these notes that Al didn't give a shit about any of this stuff, but I do, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
better. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, his relationship with Al is complex, despite the fact that he has no relationship with Al. You know,
Uh-huh,
he
uh-huh.
sort of had like 2 conversations with this guy, and now he's carrying out this mission, which is basically Al's mission.
Yeah.
And I still think a lot about the fact that Al killed himself. Um, and just maybe I'm being horribly callous here, but I still keep thinking like, come on, he could have just drugged himself up for one more day to see whether Jake was going to be successful or not. And
Mm-hmm.
I've sort of come to conclude, it's kind of the thing we talked about previously, which is like I don't think he thought Jake was going to succeed, and I think he couldn't bear to die knowing that Jake had failed, and that
Yeah.
basically both of them had wasted a huge chunk of their lives on this mission. Um, so I don't know. I see Al as a very tragic figure at this point,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, I like you said one more day, and I think that's fitting. But like, I emphasize again, we're talking about 2 minutes here
Yeah, yeah,
in real time. Like, yeah, survive the day till Jake goes down, and then survive an additional 2 minutes of time, and you'll know. Um,
right, right.
seems, yeah, it. I agree with you. Like, it seems like a person that's so heavily invested in this thing would would want to tough it out for that. But so that does lend to something, and I love that you pointed this out because it's not something that ever occurred to me when I was reading this book originally. But I think you're right. I think it's there, like the complicated nature of who Al is a very very important character plot wise, but I've never really saw his importance theme wise.
Hmm.
And I'm really liking this a lot.
Yeah, I'm also just now remembering how the first time Jake goes in the hole and then comes out, Jake Al has like started smoking, which is an insane thing for him to be doing. But it's like I think in retrospect, it's like, well, that's just indicating how incredibly stressful this is for him,
Yeah,
and how much he has riding on this. It's like he has pushed all of the chips of knowing whether his legacy is going to pay off or not into this other guy, and now it's just all riding on this like 2 minute stretch of time, and it's like that's just unbearable.
yeah.
No one can handle that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
yeah.
All right, chapter 21, Matt. Chapter 21 begins with the Oswalds moving in upstairs from Jake. It is now March of 1963, so we are moving faster and faster and closer to a couple key dates. Once again, April 10th is the date that he's going to try to kill General Walker, and then, of course, November is looming beyond that. In response to this, Jake goes and buys a gun, and it turns out here it's the same gun he used to kill Frank Dunning. I think this is funny because he says, "Oh, it's the past harmonizing again," but like now he's doing the harmony, right?
Hmm.
Like you could have just bought another gun, and he thinks about it. He thinks like, "I'm just going to ask for a Colt 45 instead to break up the harmony of the past." And he's like, "Oh, but I don't know if I should risk that." And it's like, at what point are you the one harmonizing?
Hmm. Yeah, I agree that he seems to be playing into it more, or perhaps playing it like taking advantage or manipulating it, or maybe he just thinks he is, and and
Hmm.
and it's wishful thinking. I don't
Yeah.
really know.
I also really like this. He's talking to the guy selling the guns and talking about killing people, and um, he's the guy basically says it's women are all responsible for this, and Jake says, "Nah, I guess I think sometimes it's politics though," and he responds, "Nah, at the bottom it's always a woman, son."
Uh-huh.
And I mean, we are kind of teeing that up with we have with Johnny and with Oswald as well, right? Between his mother and his wife, like you know, we're teeing up that possibility here.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. Yeah.
Um, so Matt, the weekend here we have to talk about this. One of the weekends, Jake looks out the window and sees a red and white Plymouth Fury, just kind of trolling around. Um, I just want to say we had like a billion people message us earlier when there was a Plymouth Fury in back in Maine that was obviously supposed to be Christine,
Hmm.
like the actual Christine from the story Christine. I didn't say anything then, and the reason I didn't say anything then was because I knew that the Plymouth Fury was going to show up again in the novel later. We actually see it another time. Um, so I mean, sometimes I do just miss things. Like I think someone pointed out, I saw that when our characters are going to the football game, they're playing the a team from Arnett, which is where Stu from The Stand is from.
Hmm.
I missed that. Didn't ever clock that. That's a cool, fun thing. But this one, Matt, this one, sometimes I'm not talking about it on purpose, and I was saving it for this moment. So yeah, we've seen Christine, the actual Christine, back in Maine, but we're seeing like more Christines here. Like this one has a Arkansas plate, then we see one a little bit later with an Oklahoma plate. We don't like ever. I guess the book doesn't tell us yet, or perhaps tell us at all, like what this means. Like I guess you could maybe say, oh, this is Johnny's car, right? He's spying on them, and he's like switching the plates because he's trying to hide it because he's crazy. But we don't actually know. I think right now what it works as for perhaps a constant reader is just like an ill omen that like it's the bad car. The bad car is here again, and we should feel worried about that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. One thing I will say is literally until this very moment, I didn't realize that it was literally Christine. Like I was like, yeah, it's the same make and model. I guess that's kind of cute. And it's like, no, it's Christine.
Yeah, I can't remember why. I think like there's
Oh.
like the initials of the character from Christine is seen somewhere on it. So like
Mhm.
it's gesturing specifically that the car the Plymouth Fury he sees in Maine is
Mhm.
just supposed to literally be Christine.
Okay, but yeah, I agree with you. It's just a flag for constant readers. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Jake returns to Dallas to what we're told here is like a decent domestic situation between Lee and Marina. Like this is interesting stuff, Matt, because we've seen the contentious, violent, awful nature of Lee's treatment of his wife, but we get to kind of see a like a normal moment of like them being in love and joking around and playing and laughing at the kids. um I really found this interesting, especially given the fact that where you and I are going with this is this kind of comparison and contrast between Jake and Sadie. So I'm just curious what this moment said to you specifically.
Well, I mean, it makes you feel more human toward Lee, right? Toward
Hmm.
who we increasingly are calling Lee instead of Oswald.
I just
And
don't want to say Lee Harvey Oswald every
yeah,
time, so I just like to switch it up. I don't want to use the same.
yeah, yeah. But the book is doing it too, though.
Yeah, no,
And
fair.
Jake is doing it in his own thoughts, and he's seeing him as this kid, as this newlywed, and with this baby, not literally newlywed, but like a young married man with a baby, and yeah, he has a temper on him. Yeah, he's a bore. He's an asshole. He's unlikable as hell. But he's just this stupid kid.
Yeah.
And also, and not only is Jake feeling this, but I think we're feeling this too by seeing these moments, and it becomes harder and harder to imagine shooting this man in cold blood.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that's what we're doing. I think like you know I think it's very important that we talk about this because I feel like this is a key to the novel, right? Like we've had a couple people talk about, one of the flaws of the book in their mind is, that there's a much better way to kind of munchkin this thing out. And we talked about this a little bit, right? Like I think you talked about at the very beginning, like you pop in, you shoot Lee Harvey Oswald in the head, you pop out, you
Hmm.
see what happens, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's like it seems like everything would be so much simpler and easier if we just did that. But I think what's important and what's kind of paramount to everything we're doing here is that it's hard to kill a person.
Hmm.
It's very difficult to take a life, even if it's a life of a person that did or is going to do something awful. That is not an easy thing. I mean, there's like a reason why in firing squads they would do the thing where only one person on the firing squad would have a bullet,
Hmm.
because they wanted to give people the plausible deniability of it wasn't me that killed that person, even if you knew the person was bad. Like it's hard to kill a person, and like we're really spending the time on that. I think it's because it's really important to the novel that we understand why Jake can't just walk up and shoot this guy in the head. It's not just because it would complicate, escape or anything. It's because he doesn't want to kill a person unless he has to.
Yeah.
And like that's like the book. That's like the whole book. And I think these moments really emphasize that.
Yeah, I think I was maybe going to save this bit for later, but just like Jake very wisely did not humanize Frank Dunning. He stayed away from Frank Dunning. The only interactions he had with Frank Dunning were incredibly negative.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it was relatively speaking easy for him to just murder the man in cold blood.
Yeah.
He's still kind of messed him up a little bit, but not that much. He probably still doesn't feel that bad about it, but that's totally not going to be the case here. Like he
Yeah.
has enormously humanized this guy, and it's honestly difficult for me to imagine him following through on killing Oswald. Like even if he were to have a metaphorical, not literal smoking gun, like evidence that Oswald did it, Oswald acted alone. I don't think it's hard for me to see him doing it
Mm-hmm.
now at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I jumped ahead a little bit here, but this is when he's talking about what he's going to do, and he's talking about how everything's going to go. And he said, there was no way of knowing anything for sure. And it wouldn't be until I saw with my own eyes that Oswald was alone on April 10th. Even that wouldn't be enough to put all my doubts to rest, but it would be enough to proceed on. Enough to kill Junie's father. Right? Like,
Yeah.
Speaking of humanization, there it is right there, right? Like, this is not just Lee Harvey Oswald anymore. It's not just guy who killed John F. Kennedy. He's a father. He's a son. He's a human being. And yeah, I mean, like, I think, again, I'm jumping ahead of some of the conversation I wanted to have, but this just feels like a right place to introduce the idea. A lot of what this book is doing, at least this week, is introducing us to the ways in which society is failing people. Like Johnny Clayton, we're going to get to him, is a messed up dude that perhaps in 2011 gets the help he needs to not become the way he is, right?
Yeah.
And it was just this culture, this society, it failed him, fundamentally failed him. And like, I really feel like that's Lee Harvey Oswald too. At least the way, and again, I'm not talking about literally, like in the world of the novel, like this is a person who got fucked by circumstance. His mom is like evil. Like how many beats in this book we get of her like sucking energy from torturing her loved ones. That's not an accident, right? King is basically crafting her into like a fucking Pennywise monster.
Yeah.
And he's so damaged by that, like fucked over by just the hand he was dealt. Really wants to do something important, really wants to matter, and really in some ways has good ideologies, like looking at the way we treat people in this world and saying, hey, we could do better than this. Actually, we could make this better, but just not having any of the equipment to actually like do anything with that. Like I think this is really, really purposeful and fascinating and interesting, and it makes this whole thing a billion times more complicated.
Yeah, and tragic, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, we jumped all around there, so I'm like frantically like scrolling through my notes trying to figure out where we were going from here.
Just
but
throw a dart, Scott.
Yeah. So I did want to talk about this, the moment where George and Lee discuss General Walker. Basically what happens here is George is kind of the one who puts the idea into Lee's head. He basically is like, hey, wouldn't it be great if someone just removed this problem for us, which is like the most specific and targeted phrasing you could possibly have here, to makes you think like, oh, this is exactly what he wanted. Actually, he wanted to make this guy an assassin for him.
Yeah.
But when it actually comes to like what they're going to talk about as far as the conspiracy, well, darn it, Matt, the lamp mic just breaks. It's just suddenly in this moment, it's just broken. It doesn't work no more. And we're led to believe through the story and through Jake's kind of commentary on this that this is the obdurate past stepping in once again, right? It is strategically preventing Jake from learning the information he would need to learn to proceed or not proceed with his mission, and perhaps an attempt to, well, if Jake doesn't know, then he can't act, and if Jake can't act, then the past doesn't change. Good. We like this.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it's such a circuitous way of interfering. Like it's not really stopping him from changing anything in this moment.
Yeah.
It's not stopping him as he drives to go assassinate someone. It's just stopping him from learning a piece of information. It's very sort of abstract, and I think that's interesting.
It is interesting, and it does show. Again, I don't want to personify or characterize like the obdurant past as like an actual force of strategic calculating decisions. But I did like a couple weeks ago you said that like, oh, perhaps we're learning that like the way to get to Jake is not the direct give you a flat tire or a stomach ache on the day, but to like put this honey trap in front of you that is Jody and Sadie. And then also here, like a good comparison to this is when he went to the cemetery to kind of study Frank Dunning, and it is in this visit to the cemetery, like learns, oh, this is a moment that he's going to be alone. This is a moment that is going to be a perfect place to take him out.
Mm-hmm.
The obdurate past doesn't step in and try to prevent that knowledge from being gained, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's fine with that, but here it does, and it's like almost as if like we're learning perhaps
Yeah.
and growing smarter in the ways in which we're attempting to halt this thing that he's trying to do.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if we have dabbled in the idea of personifying the past, and the text doesn't really support the idea specifically, but nor does it rule out the idea. So
Mm-hmm.
it does feel, at least, that the past is learning and adapting.
Yeah, yeah. The day of the Walker assassination attempt comes closer and closer, and once again, I feel weird, Matt. I feel weird because Jake travels to Turtle Creek Boulevard to scope out where the assassination attempt will occur, and this is yet another part of Dallas that I've lived very close to. I used to live right off of Oaklawn Avenue, and so all these street names are super familiar to me: Wycliffe, Oaklawn, Turtle Creek. Like I ran down Turtle Creek for the marathon. The marathon used to go right down there. Like in fact, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what church they're talking about when they talk about, Lee using a congregation from a church getting out. Although I could have sworn it was a Presbyterian church, not a Latter-day Saints church. But maybe that's just changed I don't know. But the point is, like this all feels very weird to me in a very specific kind of way because I've never quite experienced something like this before when I first read this book.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like probably the thing that is most similar would be, I guess, if you were a resident of Bangor reading it for the first time. But even that's not like literally, it's
Yeah.
not like literally your place where you live and the actual street names. It's just like a recreation of that place. And it's just like it's like people that live in Florida reading Doomakey would be like, yes, I recognize some of this, but not like literally this street intersects with this street here, and there's a coffee house here, and it's like, yes, I know all these things. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's weird.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. That's way more. It's down to the intersection. It's not just like
Yeah.
you live in Dallas,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or a fictionalized version of Dallas. It's like no,
Yeah.
it's literally that's where you were. Um, yeah,
Speaking
that's
of historical fiction, this to me is perhaps one of the reasons why people enjoy the genre so much is this
mhm.
level of specificity and reality of like I can read a historical fiction of account of this thing at this place I live, and I know it all, I recognize it all, and that's like it's weird for me, but it's also enjoyable on some level because it's like, yes, I can I can visualize that intersection perfectly, Stephen, because I used to go there all the time.
Yeah, you feel like you're part of it. That's
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yeah, yeah. I do like this. Every bone in my body, by which I mean every instinct in my brain, I suppose, was urging me to move on before he turned and saw me. But a powerful fascination held me in place a little longer. I think it would have held most people. How many opportunities do we have, after all, to watch a guy as he goes about the business of planning a cold-blooded murder? Well, if
Uh-huh.
you're reading this book, many,
Yeah, yeah,
because that's what Jake's doing.
exactly. I forget whether Jake himself becomes aware of this irony or not, but
I don't think he does. I don't think he
yeah,
does.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of the joy of the voyeuristic reader experience is like you're watching a guy watching a guy watching a guy, actually, which
Mm-hmm.
is it's just a very interesting and unique reading experience of like that you're watching Jake, who is the hunter who is hunting the hunter who is hunting the general.
Yes, that's true. Um, so we kind of already talked about this, but I did just want to point out that like the interesting fact that as we get closer and closer to the event in question, Al's notes get kind of less and less thorough, uh, less detailed, and I don't think it's because he was like losing a step, but it's just like as you get closer to the event that you're willing to change or wanting to change rather, you just know less. Like if the point of your mission right now is to discover something, then it stands to reason that the notes about that thing you're trying to discover will get less thorough as you get to them. And so like Jake's competitive advantage in the past is kind of going away. Like I think he says specifically in that part I read, there's no way of knowing anything for sure. Anything could happen. And it's like, yeah, Jake, that's how the world works.
Yeah.
Like you're just not used to that because you've been playing with a stacked deck for 5 years.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. As he moves closer to his goal, it's more like he's just losing all of his advantages. Yeah.
Yep. Uh, so I did also want to note here that Lee gets his rifle, the rifle, and 6 days later, the famous picture of him holding his rifle was taken by Marina Oswald. We learned though that Jake isn't there to witness this picture being taken because it was on a Sunday, and of course on Sundays he's in Jody, which I mean it's not a big deal, right? I do think it's interesting though, and it does represent a change that this is the same guy that like drove to the airport just to see Lee arrive, just because he had to. It was not necessary for his mission at all. He had nothing to gain from this, but he just wanted to see him and like know he was real and just like witness this historical moment of Lee Harvey Oswald arriving in Dallas. But in this moment, he doesn't do that. Like this picture being taken. This is one of the most famous photos of all time of Lee Harvey Oswald holding the rifle that he kills Kennedy with, and he doesn't want to witness this moment. He's busy. He doesn't
Yeah.
care.
His priorities have shifted.
Yeah. Um, and I love he says here those weekends with Sadie had become the most important, the dearest things in my life. Which again, you just got to be like, why are you doing this whole Kennedy thing again?
Yeah.
It's very like I think we pointed this out last week or the week before, but like you talked at the very beginning of this novel that this was going to have to get personal for him eventually for it to make sense narratively.
Yeah.
And it did kind of get personal, right? Like we got the moment with Harry Dunning and like Vietnam and like, but I don't even know, did Jake ever like consciously make that connection of like, I
No,
have to do this now because I have to prevent Vietnam? Maybe he did.
I don't remember him making the conscious connection. And I mean, I think what I specifically said was like, you got to have stakes in a story. Makes sense for the stakes to be, we got to save JFK, but we actually have to care about that. So it has to be dramatized.
Yeah.
Like we can't just say that and then have it be like, you just like every superhero movie where you're supposed to automatically care that the world is going to be destroyed when it's like,
Yeah.
You push that button so many times, I actually stopped caring.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have stakes, but the stakes have nothing to do with JFK. The
Yeah.
stakes are all related to, Jake's relationship with Sadie. And I like at this point in the story, I'm sort of rooting for him crying off, right?
Yeah.
Like give up, man. It doesn't matter. It's like you got something good going on in your life. This is not your responsibility.
Yeah.
Just go live in Jody and be a good man. But I think if my word choice clues you into my thought process here, I don't think he's gonna cry off, because I don't think he's capable of it. But I guess we'll see.
But what ultimately, what do you think is motivating him to push forward with this? Because, like, is it just the promise he made to a dying man? I mean, I guess that is important. Like, I was, I was, I've now decided that Al is my barista at my coffee house because I made that comparison, and I'm just imagining if this guy comes to me and says like, "You got to do this thing for me, and it's going to take like 5 years, and you might die," I would just be like, "No."
Yeah.
But perhaps if he was like dying and like saying, I this is my life work and I failed in it and I've hand selected you to carry this torch for me, maybe I'd feel a little bit differently. But
Maybe just be like, yeah, I'll definitely take care of it, and then just not do it, um um I I don't I don't know, like one thing is, like, it seems like an easy way to go with a situation like this is that the character wants to make a big impact, wants to do something big and consequential and important with his life.
Hmm.
And one way to do that is to, literally change history. But which, by the way, is exactly what Oswald is, wants to do.
Yeah.
So that's not great. The thing is, though, Jake doesn't really think about this very much. Like,
Hmm.
he doesn't grandiosely, think to himself like, I will be the one who changes the course of history and,
Yeah.
creates a new golden age. Like, he's really mostly just thinking about his mundane life issues, and then sort of building up a good hate boner for Oswald. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting because he doesn't have what you would think of as, I guess, the default character flaw for the situation.
Yeah. I mean, you can kind of, and again, we have to just do this, via supposition because we don't know. But part of me imagines like Al on year 3 of this, and like he's starting to get sick with cancer, right? And he's doubting himself, and he's maybe a little miserable in the just the rough existence of his life sometimes, and he's like spurring himself forward with like dreams of what the world is going to look like in the future with a non-assassinated Kennedy, right?
Hmm.
And he's like, "Oh, it's going to be so great, like thinking about all the conflicts we would have avoided and all the ways in which things would have gone better." And he's like motivating himself and spurring himself on with these ideas. And of course Jake's not doing any of that. Like of
Hmm.
course he's not, because he does no buy-in to that. Like that's not his primary concern. His primary concern has never been that. And the second he found something that he does care about, Jody and Sadie specifically, um, he cared even less about that. And so it does. I think it is this constant question that maybe is in the back of your head the whole time, is like, why are you doing this still,
Hmm.
man? Like, I why?
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe we'll get an answer someday, or maybe like it is just kind of part of his flaw as a character and a human being, that like he doesn't
Hmm.
ponder that very much.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know which way we're going quite yet.
Mhm. Yeah, it's fun though. I think it's
Yeah.
really interesting, right? It takes again what is a fairly straightforward, if not high concept story of time travel, and just like continues to complicate it through character, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's my favorite.
We do have in this moment though that Jake decides to tell Sadie everything, um, because she's the most important thing in the world, right? Well, okay,
Yeah.
not everything, but he tells her his name, so that's good.
That's something. We're making progress. We're making progress. I think
And
that
he,
this is also a sign of how, him downweighting the importance of the mission, because every time he kind of breaks the code of secrecy, he's slightly increasing the odds that everything goes to shit, and that,
yeah,
he has to run.
yeah, no, that's fair. He also asks her to marry him, um, and she says yes,
Yeah.
and they live happily ever after. The end.
Yeah. Uh,
Don't read any more book.
I'm
It's all good.
glad. I'm so happy. I love this book. This book makes me feel so happy. We should do a podcast where we decide where each story ends that we cover. So we'll just be reading, or watching a movie, and just like Rose and Jack are just like, I love you, Jack. We'll be together forever. And then we just stop it, and we're like,
Yeah.
that was a really good movie. That made me feel really good.
I know the exact moment too. It actually would be a
Uh-huh.
fun exercise to just pick what that moment is. Because in Titanic, it's when she turns to him and says, "When the boat docks in New York, I'm getting off with you."
Yeah.
And
And then
cool.
roll credits. Um, play the song.
Yeah, my heart will go on.
My heart will
It
go
will,
on.
and it will literally, because you're still alive and here with me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this idea. We should do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the chapter ends with Jake almost messing up. He comes face to face with Oswald. Almost comes face to face with Oswald. He narrowly avoids it. And then he ends a chapter by going to rent a safety deposit box to kind of store all his notes in, just in case. Like I think the the almost run in with Oswald kind of spooks him, and he's like, "Oh man, I didn't think about the fact that I'm living below my target. Just now thinking about that, if someone comes nosing in my stuff and finds all this paperwork, I'm in trouble.
Uh-huh.
Better put this somewhere safe." He says in year 5.
Right. It feels like an important story choice to have the safe deposit box. Like it feels narratively consequential. Like we're going to do something with the concept of the safe deposit box. I don't know.
Yeah, that feels fair. I mean, like, why specifically point it out if not to use that later? I
Right.
think is a fair assessment to make. Sure.
Yeah.
All right, Matt. Final chapter of the week, chapter 22. A pretty short one, but probably the most emotionally draining one of of the week. It is April 10th, 1963, the date that Jake will finally get conclusive evidence that Lee was the one who acted alone in his assassination of JFK. He will do this by observing that Lee acts alone in his assassination of General Walker. Now, Matt, I've kind of been holding this for this moment, and we talked about it a little bit, but this doesn't make any sense, does it? Like, when you really think about this plan, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Uh-huh. I am on the same page. Well, okay, I'm on the same page in the sense that once I started thinking about it, I quickly got on the same page. But
Uh-huh.
like this is
So,
like how you invent little side quests for yourself to avoid actually having to make a decision on some big important thing, with the justification that you're like gathering information that's
yeah,
going to help you decide. But of course, in reality, the information you're gathering is not going to change your decision, no matter how it comes out. So
yeah,
it's actually pointless. That's what this is.
yeah. So just to refresh, if anyone's forgot, here's the things we know, or at least in the context of the book, we know that the gun that was used to shoot General Walker and miss was the same gun that was used to shoot and successfully hit John F. Kennedy, right? And so the idea here is that's Lee's gun. We know he used that gun in both cases. So if we see he uses the gun and is the one who pulls the trigger in event A, which is General Walker's attempted assassination, we can then safely say, yes, Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy. He acted alone because that's his gun, and he did use that very gun to kill John F. Kennedy. So a couple things. Doesn't say that at all, actually, because
Right.
like he could go attempt to assassinate General Walker and then go run up to his friend George and be like, "Hey George, I did a thing. I missed, but like I tried." And George goes, "Oh man, cool. We should do that again together. And this time gets a bigger target. You go up in that window and I'll go over on this grassy knoll over here."
Yeah.
And that's what we'll do.
Or hand the rifle to
To me.
Mohrenschildt, you know,
Yeah.
right? Like it could, like anything could happen. It doesn't prove anything at all.
And by the way, I'm not a ballistics expert, so tell me if I'm just being stupid here. But I believe all that tells you is the type of bullet and the type of rifle that was used, correct?
Well, according to the Great Mouse Detective, I think you can tell if a particular gun fired a particular bullet, but I don't actually know if they knew how to do that in 1950, 1960,
3.
whatever, 63. Maybe,
It's in the title.
yeah. It's hard for me, numbers.
I mean, you're probably right. There's probably like specific rifling in the. I mean, there's probably a reason, yeah, but like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean the thing about the whole situation is that I personally, again, I don't have any like buy-in to any specific conspiracy theory, but if you're open to the if the hypothesis you're trying to falsify is the hypothesis of there was a conspiracy, then any information about ballistics is irrelevant because the conspiracy could have just faked that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't put any weight on that. You really can't put any weight on anything other than like eyewitness stuff that you see happen.
Mm-hmm.
And even so, setting all of that aside, like I must again zoom out and say, is this actually going to change your decision one way or the other?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it is.
No, and ultimately the point I was going to eventually get to here was it doesn't matter if this actually makes logical or rational sense at all,
Mm,
because that's not what it's about whatsoever. What this is about is, as you said, it's a side quest to give Jake what he needs. And it's like, if I can prove this, then I can myself be okay with pulling that trigger. And that's all it essentially means. Like it is uh, it's an excuse. It's a reason.
yeah,
It's the blank in the gun of the firing squad, right?
yeah,
It's a way to give yourself a pass to feel good about this thing.
yeah. But I don't even think it's true. Is my contention at this point? I don't even think that it's going to be sufficient. So we'll see.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. We'll get there.
Yeah.
And so because Jake plans to change the past on this day, April 10th, I think his plan actually is he's going to see Lee do this and then is going to just immediately kill Lee, right?
Uh-huh.
Like I believe that's his plan here. And because of that, the past prevents him from witnessing this event by putting the people he cares about in harm's way.
Uh-huh.
So this was actually set up, right? We saw the ways in which the obdurant past can rope in other people. It did that with what is his name, the guy who had a heart attack in Derry.
Yeah, I forget his name too.
Blank on his name right now, but this was set up, and again, as I said, anytime something bad happens to you, it's because someone close to you was trying to change the past.
Yep,
That's why.
I knew it.
So as Jake heads out, he finds Marina Oswald at his door, asking where her husband is, and he freaks out a little bit here, Matt, and also sees for the first time we notice, are told at least, that he notices that her eyes look a lot like Sadie's eyes. Is this so? I guess I kind of asked this question to you when we first started talking about this kind of um I forget what the word is now, but the way the harmonization of the past.
Yeah.
Like, is this all in his head? Like, do her eyes really look like Sadie's eyes, or is this just like not wish fulfillment, but like self fulfilling prophecy stuff?
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. I think what I said last time is kind of what I think here, which is that Stephen King likes this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and so he just puts it in his stories.
Sure, yeah, that's fair.
Now that is in some sense a super unsatisfying answer,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like that's extremely not within the narrative. So like, what's the reason within the narrative? And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I do like this little idea though that um, Jake, if he had not had this run in with Marina Oswald, would have just left his apartment and not been there when John Clayton calls on the phone to tell
Mhm.
him to come get Sadie. Which almost makes it seem like, once again, the personification of the obdurant past is roping Marina Oswald into its affairs to
Mhm.
get to stall Jake just long enough for the telephone call to come in. And like we said this before, and I'll say it again. Like, when you look at things like this way from the future to the past, like everything looks like this very specific, very intentional cause and effect chain, even if it not necessarily operated that way at all. But man, like that's what we're talking about here. So I just keep seeing it, just like, and the
Mhm.
books, it's not even that I keep seeing it. I feel like the book is intentionally calling this kind of stuff out. And it's like, oh yeah, because it specifically says here, had I not talked with Marina, I would have been out the door already.
Yeah, I guess it's always the case that we like to impose a narrative on our lives, but when really it's just a bunch of stuff that happened.
Yeah.
And so here he's reaching for and finding some kind of um, like will
Hmm.
in is some greater plan behind the events in play, when it might actually just literally be coincidence.
Yeah.
Um, and we never really find out. I mean, we know that in the greater Kingverse, there's cosmic forces, but there's nothing in this specific book that really talks about that. And we talked about the turtle, weeks ago
Hmm.
for like 2 minutes, but
Yeah.
other than that, not a whole lot in this book. Yeah.
Yeah. Regardless, Jake is there when the phone rings, and so he does answer it, and he finds John Clayton on the other line. He's at Sadie's, and here we go, Matt. I guess, did you see this coming? Like, did you think we were going to get here? I think we talked about this a little bit last week. I was kind of teeing you up, knowing that this was coming. But did you? It just seemed like this is where we were heading, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't exactly like predict it blow by blow, but I think the book telegraphs pretty hard that this guy's going to come back into the story. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So the story then briefly leaves Jake's point of view here, as we assume he's either like relaying information of what occurred from Sadie. It's kind of a break in the rules of the novel a little bit here, but it either implies he's just like guessing what he thinks happened, or that like he's telegraphing to us that Sadie lives this encounter, which
hmm
she ends up doing, because she's able to relay the facts to him later.
hmm
Which I don't, not really anything to say about that. Just I was kind of interested by the fact that we definitely break form here a bit.
yeah, that's true. I don't know. I guess he's playing with our sense of anxiety because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's telegraphed pretty hard that Sadie's going to die at some point in this in the future,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe he wants to not jerk us around too much. Like in terms of not making us think like, oh, is this it? This is going to be it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of tipping his hand. I don't really know.
Okay.
It's interesting though.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um. So, but we see here basically we see her get home. We see her walk into her house, and the messages in her makeup on the walls and the mirrors, and her clothes torn apart. We see her walk into her room, and Johnny grab her. He's got a gun, which we're told is the exact same pistol that Oswald used to murder the cop on his escape attempt.
hmm
Um. And he's got a knife, and he, as he speaks to Jake on the phone, he slashes her face open.
hmm
And this is, man, this is rough shit. Like, this is like, I know we expected something bad to happen here, right? Like we as you said, we kind of saw this coming and we knew it wasn't going to be good, but man, this is rough. This is brutal.
Yeah, it is. It's painful. It's painful to
Mhm.
read. You really care about these characters. You love Sadie. You want her and Jake to be happy. Um, this is just, yeah, it's just horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This part, I've told the truth so far, and I'm going to tell the truth here, even though it cast me in the worst possible light. My first thought, as my numb hands replaced the phone in its cradle, was that he was wrong. The values didn't balance. In one pan of the scales was a pretty high school librarian, and the other was a man who knew the future and had, theoretically at least, the power to change it. For a second, part of me actually thought about sacrificing Sadie and going across town to watch the alley running between Oaklawn Avenue and Turtle Creek Boulevard to find out if the man who changed America's history was on his own. Then I got in my Chevy and headed for Jody.
Yeah. I think I didn't feel like going particularly hard on our boy in this moment, despite the fact that it's, our favorite thing to do, because like his only sin really is thinking for 10 seconds like a typical time travel story protagonist and then doing what he knew was the right thing to do anyway.
Yeah.
So I just don't feel like going to, busting his balls for this.
No, I don't either. I think it's deeply ironic that like that one of the least like mean awful things he does is briefly think about something bad and then just immediately decide not to do it.
Uh-huh.
And that's like the one thing he telegraphs to us is like, this doesn't make me look good. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, Jake, no, there's like 20 other things that you did that you didn't write that sentence about that didn't make you look good. This
Uh-huh.
is the one thing where I'm like, no, I get it, man.
Yeah. No, that's a funny observation. Yeah.
um you said, we're famous to do, and you mentioned this last week, that we are kind of like infamous for giving our protagonist a hard time, and I agree with you. I will say, however,
Uh-huh.
it's not like we're just pulling this out of our ass.
Uh-huh.
I feel like these books are intentionally wanting us to give our protagonists a hard time. I mean, like, take the Dark Tower for instance. Like, I don't think King like is like, no, I want you to fully love and support Roland and everything he does.
You
Like, I
totally
don't think we're just like
yeah.
the books we read are wanting us to give our protagonist a hard time, and here, this is another example of them, because he's specifically telling us in his narration to give him a hard time.
Yes, I 1 trillion% agree that the books that we cover where we do that a lot are the books where the author and the narrative have set up like you're supposed to feel conflicted and complicated about this, and I'm
Mhm.
inviting you to talk about that.
Yeah.
Um, and then people get really mad at us because they think the characters are perfect, and it's
Uh-huh. Yeah. We have no
anyway.
chips on our shoulder about this at all.
No,
Yeah.
but the thing about Jake is by far is far less of a like horribly flawed and in denial and unreliable narrator type of character than we often
Yeah.
get, but like he is flawed. He's a flawed character,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
like that's par for the course, right?
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
storytelling. So
And I think the thing that he does here that is, much worse than like briefly thinking about sacrificing Sadie on the altar of the greater good is I need some help with this. I'm going to call Deke. He's the only one that can help. And like he does this kind of deciding that the past is harmonizing and that Deke will play the role of the sacrificial heart attack victim as the Dunning situation is going to replay. He basically decides that this is going to be a replay of the Frank Dunning situation, and therefore I'm going to invite Deke, but he's going to have a heart attack and definitely going to die. But I don't care because it's Sadie.
mm,
And like I'm going to be clear here. I get that. I get it. Like it's the person you love. But I think that comes off as not great for him.
yeah,
I don't know. What do you think?
yeah. I mean, I agree that this is him acting like more of a time travel protagonist,
Yeah.
like sort of callously exploiting this theory that he has that like this is what I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I know that if I get a helper, the helper will help me prevail, but then die.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's I think I hold it against him a little bit less because there's just his love of his life is at stake here,
Yeah.
and it's hard for me to be like, no, don't solicit the help of the lovely old man who would gladly die to save Sadie if you
Yeah.
asked him. It doesn't sound that bad, right? It's just
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely not. I mean, I do like in his calculus, he's like, he's old,
yeah, right.
which comes off as a little callous for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. I mean that's what I
Uh,
think whenever I'm cutting someone off in traffic, but it's not. You shouldn't say it though.
yeah. Yeah. I do think I like what you said about like him basically kind of he's observed this effect that's happening in the past and has basically decided to kind of weaponize it. Is
Mhm.
that like I know that the past wants to harmonize and therefore I can use this to my advantage by playing the right tune. I mean that's part of the reason why he ended up getting that gun, right?
Yeah,
He could have gotten a different gun, but like, oh, the harmonization of the past is a tool here actually.
yeah.
Although I think it's worth being said, we don't specifically see Deke like have a heart attack, right? Like, I think there's a moment where he's like, I looked over to Deke expecting him to grab his chest, but I didn't see that.
Right. I mean, you're correct. And the harmonization thing is always this big question mark to me because I'm like, it could all just be a series of relatively minor coincidences and also just kind of his imagination, as you pointed out earlier.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, like none of it. It would be kind of an interesting story development if he started sort of manipulating this observed regularity in the way time travel works to be more successful. But I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't seem that solid. Like it just doesn't
yeah.
seem that reliable of a thing that you could work with it.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. Um. So So here we go. They show up at the house. Jake heads through the back as Deke goes through the front. We see Jake walking through a hedge, just like with the Dunning house, and into the house he goes. There's a confrontation. It ends with Jake almost killing John, but holding off on the last minute and instead leaving him with a broken nose. I think it's worth saying that at least part of the calculus here was if there's a murder here, I suddenly get a lot more investigated, and my fake backstory won't actually hold up to scrutiny. um Again, we'll say like this confrontation ends with a death either way,
Yeah.
so we end perhaps a little worried about Jake
Yeah.
in that, but it does get him to stop what he's doing here.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it leaves him looking a little bit better, I guess, because he didn't
Hmm.
kill a man in cold blood right in front of
Yeah,
Sadie. But
sure.
the guy. But yes, all of the bad complications I think still ensue.
Yeah. Let's talk about John Clayton a little bit here, Matt. We kind of jumped around a bit and talked about this earlier than I wanted to, but it's worth mentioning like who this guy is. Who's we see him here in this moment, and he's a monster. He's like fully monstrous. Like I think King writes him almost like an animal. Like I love. I picked this at like Clayton turned upper lip lifted in a snarl, right? Like he describes him monstrously, but then also he describes him. I don't even know the right word. Like let me read this. You can't hit me. Spit flew from his lips. His eyes fluttered like those of a man having a seizure. His urine let go. I hear it padding on the carpet. I'm a mental patient. I'm not responsible. I can't be held responsible. I have a certificate. It's in the glove compartment of my car. I'll show it to you. Right? Like, what a fascinating way of depicting this person who we're told from Sadie is like has OCD. It's a little bit not normal, but is essentially harmless. Is the way she described him. Is like he doesn't like confrontations. He's not a violent person. He's just a little bit off. And this person is not that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think my take was that, the best of 1960s psychiatric care
Yeah.
took in this poor man and broke him the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
which, I mean, doesn't he say in here that they gave him shock treatment?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, he says that, Sadie left him. It really messed him up. Then a woman touched him at work.
Hmm.
Like probably just like a harmless, like put hand on shoulder or something.
Hmm.
And he freaked out about it, got checked into mental health care facility. I was trying to come up with the correct 2024 word for it, but an insane asylum, basically. Let's just call it what it was back then.
Right.
Yeah, it fucked with his brain and turned him into a monster. And like we talked about, we were talking about Lee a little bit ago. Like this is all like to me speaking about what we're doing here, about how people are turned into monsters, essentially.
Yeah, I think you are correct. Another sort of object of pity and disgust, right? I
Yeah,
notice I can't help but pair Jake seeing Jake seeing Oswald weeping and feeling mixed pity and disgust, and then here he sees this man sort of have an emotional breakdown and he feels rage. In both cases, I think it's having like it's not it's an understandable reaction, I think, to but I think it also highlights something about Jake, which is that he sees people who are imploding as figures of pity but also disgust to
yeah,
him, because it's weakness, right? It's like this is like kind of going all over the place here, but it kind of connects to this bigger King theme, is that his villains are so often afraid, and they're just
hmm
like weak, scared men who act out of like some twisted sense of self-preservation,
yeah,
not like some like diabolical malicious plot. They're just scared and dumb, and
yeah.
so they are sort of valid subjects of both pity and disgust, actually.
hmm Yeah, I agree. I agree. I love this. I think it's so. Again, like you kind of think in your head, what is the John Clayton conversation or confrontation going to look like when you're kind of imagining it before it happens, and then it gets there, and it's everything that you thought it might be, but it's also like 20 times more complicated than you could have possibly thought. And that's I think that's one of the things that elevates this book is just like everything we're doing is complicated and nuanced and character driven, and I just really like it. I really like it all. I'm really loving this book.
Me too.
All right, so the chapter ends with John Clayton defeated, standing up, saying, "Sadie, is this what you wanted?" and then slashing his own throat. She is cut pretty bad too, Matt. Like we're told in this again, past harmonizing, that this is like Mike's girlfriend, but way 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 worse. Like
Hmm.
this is not something that a fundraiser for a cosmetic surgery is going to just make completely disappear in a few years. This is bad. Like the skin has been torn. Like I think
Hmm.
it's just half of her cheek is just flapping over on itself.
Yeah, right.
She's been cut very very badly.
Yeah. Um, got a real tattletale situation going on.
You can't you can't just do that.
Yeah, some percentage of people will get that, and they'll enjoy it.
Sure. All right. So, I mean, what happens now, Matt? That's the question. This is where we leave it this week. It's the end of this part as well. So we're gonna move on to I think the penultimate part of the book next. But where do we go from here? Because Sadie is hurt. There's a dead body in her house. George/Jake was there, and so he's got some splaining to do, and he misses Oswald's assassination attempt. So what's gonna happen, Matt?
I mean, I don't really know, but we've got a lot of complications in play, as you
Uh
just
huh.
said. He missed his mission oriented moment. You just said that. I don't think he needed to see it anyway, so I think he's going to confront the fact that maybe that was all bullshit. We've got a
Okay.
very injured Sadie. We've got something the police are going to be interested in. I think they're going to find out that he doesn't have, it's unclear whether they'll actually find out, like, oh my God, this man has no records, because he does have records. He has falsified records that
Mm-hmm.
have held up until this point. Um, so I don't know. I don't know what happens next. I do know that it becomes trickier for him to get back to his mission, right? It
Yeah.
becomes a lot trickier.
Yeah.
And also, it looks much worse for him to just go like, all right, Sadie, I know that you're like literally in the hospital dealing with this horrible thing that happened to you, but I've got to go do some time travel, timey-wimey shit. So,
Yeah. I mean, you're so right. Like, if there was ever a time to abandon the mission, like my girlfriend is in the hospital and is going to be in there for quite some time. Um, seems like the time. So
yeah.
I love this as, like, this is the perfect, like, second act closer, right, to move into the third act, because if you actually study how act structures work, like, an event that shifts the novel in a way that you're clearly moving into the next phase of things, but it also fundamentally, like, redefines what the conflicts are,
Yeah.
and like how they're going to play out, like, is textbook second act break. And I feel like that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. I think you're right.
All right, so we'll have to find out how that's all going to play out next week. We're going to be reading three more chapters 23 through 25. This is actually, like, the longest section of the book that we're going to be reading. It's like 90 pages. So just saying that to everyone, if it's Thursday as you're listening to this and you haven't started reading yet, you might want to devote a little bit more time to this, because it's one of our longer ones for sure.
Yep. I will be listening to it on the roller coaster in Disneyland.
Good luck with that.
It'll be great.
All right, folks, this episode has gone on really long here. So we're going to elect to play a card we don't normally like to play and don't normally have to play, but we're gonna skip the discussion question section this week. I think we had a lot of great talk about this section of the novel that went on a little longer than we thought. So we did read your answers to the question about historical novels, and we really liked them. I think there's a lot to talk about in historical novels, and maybe we'll revisit that talk as we approach the end of the novel. But for now, we're just going to call this the end of the show.
Yeah, there were an unusual number of discussion question answers where I was like, "Oh my God, I've actually read that." For
And of
once.
course, it's the one where we're not going to actually get to talk about them on the
Exactly,
show.
exactly.
That's how it works.
Yeah,
But we do have a question for you next week that hopefully we do get to read the answers out live on air. It's a question that perhaps would have been better suited to last week than this week, but I do like it. What I wanted to ask you is folks, what is your, like, favorite Rear Window esque storytelling moment of, like, a person observing the lives of people from a distance, and watching as those, and, like, as Matt said, like, this kind of nested observation where we're observing a person who's observing the lives of others, and
yeah.
how, and what that story's doing, and how it's doing it, and what you like about it. Like, just talk about your favorite examples of those.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't have to be malicious necessarily. Obviously,
No,
just
no, yeah,
anything in that broad category.
yeah,
It's a fun type of story.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that will be the question for next week. We will try really, really hard to not go on for so long that we have to cut that section out of the show. But no promises because it's 93 pages that we got to talk about next week.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
All right, but that's it for us here this week. Next week, as we said, chapters 23 through 25. It will be the I've made the same comment before, but not penultimate, but
Penultimate.
there
Yeah,
we go.
yeah,
Penultimate.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I can't believe we're getting close to the end of this book already. It feels like we just started.
I
But
know. Yeah,
it's been
totally.
it's been 2 months. It's been 2 months.
Yeah, I know. I know. Well, anyway, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and over on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
And if you're at all interested in some great Kingslingers and Doof Media merch, please check out our merch store. You can head on to doofmedia.myshopify.com and get a whole bunch of great stuff. I'm not going to use the phrase "murderer's row" again. That didn't go over well.
Oh yeah.
No, it was fine. I actually learned it's just to describe a really good set of pitchers from the 1927 New York Yankees.
That's
So no murder at
that
all.
that somehow doesn't answer the question at all. But fine, yeah, fine.
No murder involved.
But
So
then why?
they're just really good.
Okay, all right. They
They just
murder the
they
pitches, I
just
guess.
murdered him.
Okay, great,
Do you
cool.
think we use like they murdered him like more or less in casual conversation than they did in the 1920s?
Probably about the same.
It's really a cop out of an answer.
I'm just thinking about the fact that comedians are always like, he murdered up there. So they definitely say it a lot. And then I can also hear in like a 1920s gangster voice, he murdered him, boss. Well, a bit like that's literally though. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. Probably more because there's more people now. How's that for a serious answer?
That's a Lee Harvey Oswald. I kind of like Kennedy answer. That's what that is.
I kind of like saying I murdered him. I kind of like it. Anyway, if you want to show support for the Kingslingers and you want to listen to some cool bonus podcasts, and both of those things sound good to you, or one of them, then head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and check out the cool stuff we have over there.
If you cannot afford this to do if you cannot afford to do so right now, that is absolutely okay. There are other ways to help us out. You can share this podcast and you can leave us a rating and a review. Matt, we actually do have a new review, but I forgot to type it into the script. So I am vamping right now as I desperately try to pull up the software to read the review because we actually do have one.
Yeah,
Here we go.
Vamping is an important skill.
And I'm so good at it.
Yeah,
here we go. 5 stars from Camping Cats and Cheese, who says, the apotheosis of King podcasts. I've been a constant listener since the first season and love sharing the show in real life. Matt and Scott have a wonderful chemistry and obviously love for the art of storytelling. Whether you're a rabid King fan or casually interested, they will enhance your experience with the books they cover. Having a superfan guide and neophyte is a fascinating way to explore a story. When you're adding in the way King weaves his individual stories together, constant readers get to feel the thrill of discovery through Matt's experiences while empathizing with Scott's need to bite his tongue and not dance around in excitement. New readers and experienced alike benefit from their detailed and thorough analysis. I took several trips to the tower before finding Kingslingers and was almost ashamed by how much they brought out of the stories that I never caught. This made me more passionate about it though, and has inspired a couple more trips. But be careful, you might end up dipping a toe in their other shows and end up becoming friends with 2 dudes who don't know you exist. By far my favorite podcast and life-changing, and they gave me the impetus to finally go visit Maine.
Excellent.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I hope you're going to be visiting Maine in mid-June, and we'll get to see you there.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'm glad we invented this format of neophyte and regular reader.
You said that kind of sarcastically, but as far as I know, we did.
That is true. We don't know of any predecessor, although it seems unlikely that we did invent it. But I think we invented it. I think we did.
History is decided by people who walk up to a public forum and say, "I did this first."
Yeah.
So we're doing it.
This is my thing now, and you're doing a one of my thing is what you're doing. Yeah.
That's true. So see more of this thing that we invented next week on another episode. We'll see you then. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.